Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Basingstoke and Dean Security Committee. Before we start anything, I'd like to run through some Scrutiny Committee. Same difference, thank you, Tony. Fire evacuation procedures for this evening. There are no fire alarms scheduled at all, therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. For this evening only, the fire evacuation will be out of that door at the end of the committee room, out through reception and meet in War Memorial Park. It's just that we have a sign here that says go another way, but specifically for tonight out of that door. Webcast of meetings, the meeting's being webcast live, and our Democratic Services confirms that, and it will be available on YouTube after the meeting. Microphones. May I remind members and officers and our guests that in order to be heard clearly within the room by those present and on the webcast, you must speak clearly into your microphone. The microphone stem can be moved, and as it is close to your mouth as possible. Please don't move the base, because the base is geared to the cameras that will zero in on your various speaking. Mobile phones, please switch your phones off or turn them to silent. Thank you very much. I'll now move on to the agenda. And it's apologies for absence and substitutions. I have information on 2 absentees, and that is Councillor Bean, who's unfortunately contracted COVID, and Councillor Carr, who has been detained in London at work, and will be joined by one of the portfolio holders a bit later. He's again had train problems coming from London. Are there any declarations of interest by members of the committee on matters on the agenda this evening? Nope, thank you very much. I have not been presented with any urgent matters. We have a fairly full agenda this evening, though, and I'll be setting some fairly critical times for speakers and everything else, but it will become obvious as we move through the agenda. Move on to the minutes of the meeting held on the 18th of July. Are there any observations on those minutes in terms of accuracy? Nope. Committee happy with that? I will sign those minutes as the chair, even though I was absent for that meeting, at the end of this meeting. We now come on to the transport update. And very kindly, we have our guests here this evening to run through this update. I understand that most of the presentations, and correct me if I'm wrong, will be around 5 to 7 minutes long. I intend to allow questions after each presentation of the same length of time. We'll have to keep it to that kind of timing. If there are any outstanding questions from the committee to the speakers, I will ask Mark Lambert to address these in writing to the committee, and the Vice Chair, Councillor Tustain, will be heading up the Transport Review Task and Finish Group. Those questions could be taken as part of the work programme of that Task and Finish Group. So we won't delay or extend the meeting on the transport presentation, but we will include members' comments. We'll capture them. Okay, so I can pass over to Mark Lambert to introduce the paper, please.
Thank you for that really helpful introduction, Councillor Miller. I've just got a very brief kind of introduction to the item this evening. It's a reminder that this evening's paper is at the request of Councillor Tustain's request to Scrutiny from back in July. It's focused on public and community transport as well as our licensing provision locally. For information, Appendix 1 sets out the request that Councillor Tustain made, so that gives you some parameters as to where we're heading this evening. As the Chair mentioned, we've got speakers joining us this evening from Hampshire County Council, colleagues from Stagecoach, and we've got 2 officers from Basingstoke and Dean. Their names are on the slide there, and I'll ask them each to introduce themselves when they join the table. As we mentioned, they've got a short amount of time to run through a few slides and questions after each speaker. Looking ahead, there's a proposal for a task and finish group, so that forms the basis of the recommendation. And I believe we'll be looking for membership of that towards the end of the session. So without further ado, I'll pass on to Andrew Wilson from Hampshire County Council.
Good evening, Councillor. So I'm Andrew Wilson. I lead on public transport policy at the County Council. So that includes everything to do with bus, rail and ferry. I tend to get involved with major public transport schemes, things like bus lanes, bus priority measures, bus station improvements, real-time information, all those sorts of things that are geared around getting more people to use public transport. I do a lot of work with the bus operators and the train companies, trying to improve services and facilities for our passengers, and it's all about getting more bums on seats on public transport. I'm going to give you a quick whistle-stop tour of a number of issues that we're dealing with at the moment on buses tonight. Limit it to about 5 minutes, and then obviously we'll take questions after that. So first of all, some of the major things that are going on at the moment, there's the £2 fare cap for all single journeys on buses, and that's been in operation since January this year, and it's funded by the government. It's been a real success, particularly on the longer distance bus routes where the fares are significantly over £2 for a single journey, and it's proving extremely popular on those longer distance routes. That's in operation until the end of October, and then that changes to £2.50, that fare cap, and that runs for another 12 months until November next year. So still it's positive action from the government, and it's having the desired effect of getting more people back to using buses following the pandemic. In terms of funding, we at the County Council, in response to the National Bus Strategy a couple of years ago, we wrote our bus service improvement plan that set out what we wanted to do with our partners at the bus operators to improve bus services in the county. We didn't receive any funding in the first round, but in the last couple of months we've been awarded 3.6 million for this year and 3.6 million for 24-25 to develop and implement those measures that are in our bus service improvement plan. So that's all about the sorts of things that I mentioned a couple of minutes ago. It's about helping buses move through traffic better. It's about improving reliability, improving frequency. Frequency is a real driver of growth on buses, and that's something that we're working with the operators on to improve the frequencies wherever we can. And then on top of that funding, that's 7.2 million over the next 2 years. Our executive member made a decision in March this year to ring fence all of our concessionary fares underspend from last year and this year to those similar measures that we will be implementing through our bus service improvement plan. So altogether, that's not far short of 10 million over the next 2 years, and that's a really good amount for us to do some really good work. In terms of other updates, we're continuing to reimburse our bus operators for concessionary travel at pre-COVID levels, and that is all about a policy decision to keep as much money in the bus system as we can. We know that by keeping the cash flowing, that is maintaining a number of bus services that would have either been reduced or disappeared in the light of the reduced passengers during the pandemic. Moving on, we at the County Council have carried out a significant public consultation and stakeholder consultation over the summer this year about our budget pressures from April 25. Really difficult time predicted, and that is looking at potentially removing an awful lot of the discretionary spend that we have at the County Council, and that includes community transport and our local bus support budget. That was likely to come as part of a stage 2 consultation. I'm guessing that will be early next year. Other things of note, the bus driver shortage remains a big issue. A lot of the bus companies, not just in Hampshire but around the country, are suffering from a significant shortage of bus drivers, and that's hindering their efforts to run reliable services and to grow their networks. I'm sure we'll hear more about that from my colleagues at Stagecoach in a few minutes. And just to say that operating costs within the industry have risen significantly, just as our bills at home have increased, whether it's gas, electricity, diesel, petrol, all those wages, all those costs have gone up. It makes running buses more expensive. It makes them less viable. So what does that mean overall for the County Council and for buses? Well, the government's actions are very welcome, but it's short-term funding that they've awarded us for the bus service improvement plan. It's only a stopgap. Demand for bus services has changed as a result of the pandemic. There are more people working at home. We're not seeing the concessionary pass holders come back in the same numbers that they were travelling before the pandemic. But there are more journeys being made for leisure and social purposes. We've got more money available than anticipated for the next 2 years to improve bus services. We weren't expecting quite as significant a BSIP settlement as we got, so that's really welcome. But it is only available for a short time, so we've got to use it in a way that will help the long-term growth of the bus network. So in response to this changing demand, we need to rethink how we do our bit at the County Council to shape the marketplace. And in bold there, the second bullet point is really the key to how we see the future panning out. What we've got to do is support the expansion of the commercial bus network by removing delays where we can, improving reliability, helping the bus operators to improve the frequencies of their services and make services more attractive to customers. We're not going to be able to afford long-term subsidies for a big bus network in Hampshire. We've got to get more bus services operating through boosting the commercial network. In rural areas, it's really difficult. We're not, as I just said, we're not going to have that long-term revenue funding available. So in rural areas, it might not be a bus. We might need to help communities to help themselves and lead their own initiatives to get people about, which we can help facilitate with, whether it's with bus service improvement plan money or other monies that we get in. But rural transport in terms of buses will look different in the future.
Thank you very much. At this stage, any questions from the committee? Yes, Jay.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank the officers for all the work that's been done, and it's great that we've received that 3.6 million grant through the application made this year. And we've ring-fenced some of the expenses or the planned spend, but how that is sort of a plan for this financial year? Is it being allocated for anything specific, or is it still being just sitting with the officers, not decided what to do with that? Thank you.
We had our executive member for Universal Services decision meeting yesterday, and he approved in principle the spend of the 7.2 million of bus service improvement plan funding over the next 2 years. We set out a range of initiatives that would go towards, from pump priming more commercial services, maintaining existing services, bus shelter and bus stop improvements. There's something in there about helping the bus operators to get ready for zero emission operation, get their depots and their fleets ready for electric and possibly hydrogen operation. A whole range of initiatives are in there. Where we're at the moment is we've got delegated authority through that decision as officers to make that work, and it will be a director decision as to exactly how that is disseminated. What I can say is that there's some work going on already through our bus service improvement plan in Basingstoke to look at measures on the highway to help buses move more quickly. We've done some audits of the bus stop infrastructure, the shelters, the real-time information, the walking routes to and from bus stops in Basingstoke, and that work is coming to fruition now. So I can't say sitting here now that how much of that money will be spent in Basingstoke, but it's likely that some of it will be. Certainly the bus priority measures that we're developing, we'd like to take those forward.
Thank you. Councillor Jones.
Yeah, just touching on that, how much money is going to be spent in Basingstoke? Because when I've seen plans in the past, everything seems to be round Portsmouth, Southampton, big areas, but so is Basingstoke. And I do worry that we, up the north of the county, seem to be forgotten a little bit. And I just wondered what percentage we're getting in spend up here.
I can't give you exact figures, but what I can say is that when we wrote the bus service improvement plan, which was a requirement of the National Bus Strategy, it was a couple of years ago now, that's a document that is owned by Hampshire as a whole. It's not a county council document. It's owned by the bus operators as well. So when we wrote that, very much the flavour of what was coming through is exactly as what you just described. That there's been a lot of initiatives gone forward in the south of the county around the two city regions of Portsmouth and Southampton and Fareham and Gosport, those sorts of areas. And the bus operators were very keen for us to look at Basingstoke. So some of the work that we're doing to look at the infrastructure and the services around Basingstoke, it was the top of the shopping list from Stagecoach that we looked particularly at southwest Basingstoke and that quadrant going out towards what will become Many Down, Brighton Hill, those sorts of areas, and look at what the art of the possible is and invest there. We've recently done some work at East Rock Roundabout to rephase the traffic signals to help buses get out of the bus station more easily. We're looking at the potential for a new bus lane on New Street, New Road, to help buses avoid having to go all the way around the one-way system. So there's development work going on, and that corridor out to the southwest is a real focus, and Stagecoach were keen on that, and that's why we're taking the work forward here.
You mentioned New Road and the one-way system. What about, there has been talk about making the town a two-way system, and I think it'd get a lot of favour within the council, because it doesn't work. The one-way system was put in the late 60s. It worked then, but it doesn't work now. It doesn't even work for the buses. Surely we should be looking at that as part of it as well.
That would be a wider piece of work than I can comment on, really. I mean, I'm really focused on getting the buses working better, more reliably, quicker, and it sounds as though you're kind of bought into that concept, which is great. What impacts there would be of changing the road system in the centre of Basingstoke, it's not something that I've looked at personally, but it's not to say that colleagues aren't doing so. I just don't know the answer to that one, I'm afraid.
Councillor Basham.
Hi there. I've got a couple of quick questions. With the fare cap, can I pay that fare in cash, or is it all cashless now? And my second question was around Hampshire County Council budget cuts. You've mentioned this BSIP money that's come from government and a rollover of some prior year monies. You've talked about things like bus lanes and shelters, which sound to me like capital spend. And then you said something to the effect of, but that revenue money is only around for a short period of time, and then HCC's got revenue budget cuts. So I guess I'm just trying to work out how all those pieces fit together over the next 5 years and what that sort of looks like. I did have a question on rural things as well. I'm just wondering if you're looking for a pilot scheme rurally and whether any one of my colleagues might have an idea about that.
Okay, yeah, cash still. Ultimately, that's a decision for the bus operators to make, but as far as I'm aware, cash is still very welcome from the bus operator, so I don't think there are any plans to change that at the moment. There may be certain tickets with some operators that you can only buy that they would electronically, whether it's on the app or whether it's via cashless payment with a debit card, credit card on the bus, but they would tend to be weekly, monthly, annual tickets, those sorts of things. In terms of the balancing act, if you like, over the next few years between, we've got an influx of money now, we've got the 7.2 million bus service improvement plan money, we're likely to have around 2 million in the concessionary fares underspend, that's nearly 10 million when you kind of add it all together. We've got to balance what we do with that money against the longer term view of we're very likely to have less money to spend on subsidising non-commercial routes, and it is going to be a very fine balancing act. So what we're trying to do is focus that money on on growing the existing commercial network, and we've got to look at very low cost measures in rural communities. Buses in rural areas are really difficult, really expensive to fund. They're long distance, they have fewer passengers, therefore less revenue. Because they're longer distance, they use more fuel, more driver hours, really expensive. So that's why and if you're talking about pilots and pilot areas, very happy to have a conversation about where you think that might work, particularly with community-led initiatives that we can support and get going. There are some already in Hampshire, and we've got some Hartley Whitney would be one example with their community bus. And we've got ideas for where we might put in demand responsive transport systems as part of the bus service improvement plan, but we're not tied down to anything in particular at the moment.
Just a quick follow-up, if I may. I didn't hear the word revenue or capital in there at all, so I heard the word money lots. So I'm taking from that you don't see yourselves as bound by revenue or capital budgets around this. This is improvement for the network money, and it can be capital or revenue. Would that be broadly correct?
We're trying to be as flexible as we can around the money that we've got in for the BCB. DFT are telling us it's predominantly revenue money, but it can come down to fine margins of, are we replacing old worn out bus shelters with new ones, and is that capital expenditure or is that revenue expenditure? If we're replacing an old fashioned real-time information screen with a new one, is that capital, is that revenue? And those are the sorts of things that we're exploring, and we're trying to keep that money as flexible as we possibly can.
Finally, Councillor Bound.
Thank you, Chair. It did sound to me as though you were sort of writing off the rural areas in terms of it just too difficult a problem to solve. In part, your answers to my fellow councillor have given me a little bit of confidence that maybe you are thinking that way. But have you any specific answers to possible rural solutions?
What we have at the moment is that we've got over 30 what we call taxi share schemes in the county, and they are where in the past it's been uneconomical to provide a bus service because it's just too expensive. So what we do is we work with local taxi companies and we put those routes out to tender, but the passengers have got to pre-book. And if they pre-book, the taxi will come and pick them up, and at the moment, or previously, you could use your concessionary pass on those taxi shares. If nobody booked on, the taxi wouldn't run and we wouldn't get a bill. So it was a very cheap, or a cheaper way of us providing mobility to people in rural areas where it was unviable to provide bus services. So it's quite possible that we'll see more of that sort of service. But the problem with that potentially is that they're quite invisible. And often with bus services, you need to see them out and about in the community. People will see a taxi share, they don't necessarily see it as a bus service. But it is a way of kind of trying to maintain that kind of social cohesion, if you like, in rural communities. So the taxi share is one. The problem with demand responsive transport is that there aren't any schemes in the country that are commercially viable, that are self-funding. And that's that comes out of the equation, if you like, of so few people and the expense of paying a driver and running a vehicle, and it's really difficult. It's those areas in those parts of the rural communities that have got longer distance bus services that travel through them, they will be fine. But those that are more isolated and need a kind of discrete transport service, that we're going to have to be looking at things like taxi shares, and we're going to have to be looking at community-led initiatives that we can support at low cost. That's that. Unfortunately, if we haven't got the budget, if the discretionary budget is reduced, we've got less to spend. That's the reality.
No, the reason I'll stop you short, timing, but I've just had a quiet word with Councillor Tustain. I think that's probably going to be one of the elements of the Task and Finish group, that they can continue that rural side in conjunction with officers and with Hampshire County Council to see if, and it's within the broad spectrum of what the Task and Finish group is all about. So I think then members will have the opportunity to partake as a sort of drop into the Task and Finish group to eventually get the answers that they want. Okay, thank you very much. And from the chair, I welcome Stagecoach. It's good to see you at the table.
Okay, good evening. My name's Mark Reddy. I'm, I was going to say the new managing director of Stagecoach, but I just worked out it's week 12, so I've probably got to the end of this week and then that introduction falls away naturally. But yeah, I'm Mark Reddy, Managing Director for Stagecoach. I've worked in public transport all my life. I don't know the full Basingstoke route network in my head yet, by definition of the time I've been with the company, but I will get there. But I'm aided by my colleague on my left who will introduce himself as well.
Hello, yeah, I'm James O'Neill. I'm Commercial Director at Stagecoach.
Okay, so just a little bit about Stagecoach that you may know, so apologies, but a little bit about us locally as well. So we're the largest bus operator in the UK, and we employ just under 24,000 people. Buses are really important. I think most people around this table know that, in terms of those different bullet points there that I won't go through, but they're a vital part of economic growth. But buses are important by definition of being able to provide mass transit. And it's horses for courses. It's not economical to run a service for one person, as we know, but where there are mass demands, strong flows, then the bus is the right option. I should say I'm not anti-car. I have a car myself. It's about how you use your car is the most important thing, I would say. But getting buses through our towns and cities is the big challenge that we have to deliver that economic growth and the contribution we make to the communities and the economy as a whole. In Basingstoke, we run about 46 buses. We've got a depot, obviously, in Rankin Road, and we have offices at the bus station as well. So we're a local employer when you bring it down to what we do locally here. And Stagecoach South, the area I'm responsible for, covers off a lot of bus services in Hampshire, West Sussex and Surrey across 8 depots. Just want to touch on the cost side, and Andrew mentioned that before. Our costs have risen as an industry by 13.5% in a year. Some of that is labour, and we know the challenges on labour that we face, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But it's not just labour, it's material spend. We're all facing it in terms of the cost of living crisis, so it's no surprise that sort of figure appears. But that does put pressure on what we can operate by definition of the cost of operation. Locally, we have a great partnership with Hampshire County Council and yourselves and other local authorities. My job, I want to grow the business. I'm not here to try and cut the business, but we also have to look at where there are greater opportunities to carry more passengers compared to an area where, or a route where there's very low passengers. It makes an overall benefit to operate services where there's more demand. We want to ensure sustainability as well, and along with that is zero emission. I am very focused on putting our vehicles into a programme to deliver zero emission, whether that's electric or hydrogen, most probably electric in this part of the world. And we're working with Hampshire County Council to put in another bid for that, and I'll touch on that later. But my final piece before handing over to James, zero emission vehicles doesn't resolve our congestion issue. It makes us feel good that we're making an impact to the climate, and there's nothing wrong with that, that's laudable, but it doesn't solve our congestion issue. And when buses can get from A to B quicker than cars, that's when we're really in business. I'll hand over to James for the next few slides.
Thank you. So I've shared a similar slide to this earlier in the year, and it hasn't changed hugely, I have to say. I'm pleased to say that since I last spoke to you in February, March, we've continued to see really strong passenger growth on our network. Most of the mileage that we run in Basingstoke and indeed our wider region in Hampshire is operated commercially, so it's paid for only by the people who are travelling. Some of those people are paid for if they're concessionary pass holders through central government funding, but fundamentally keeping the wheels turning is all about getting people paying for their journey. The coloured symbols on the map there are just showing where we've had customers coming back to us since 2019. So in the 4 years we've had since that last really good year before the pandemic, we've had a really mixed response across the network from people coming back to bus. So there are some really good numbers on there, and generally speaking, Basingstoke is probably middle of the road in our wider region in terms of numbers of people coming back to us. We've got some really strong city regions elsewhere along the south coast, and we've got some particularly difficult cities in terms of getting people back on bus. Basingstoke's somewhere in the middle, so you can see on there that the Campshot Park area, Service 2 up at the top towards Hadley and Borghurst are both well above where they were in 2019, and we've got South Ham, Old Basing and Chinham, which unfortunately are still lagging behind. And then in the middle we've got some that are around about the 90% for Popley, Winkelbury and Brighton Hill. The really good thing about our network in Basingstoke is that broadly we've always run buses quite frequently, so where we've had fewer people coming back, we've been able to tune the network according to that demand. So generally speaking, our buses are as busy and the wheels are keeping on turning because we've got the right number of people to pay for those journeys. We've just not run as many buses as we had 4 years ago. We've got really good growth. We are seeing double-digit growth from where we were a year ago, and that is helping us reinvest and put some of those buses back on the road. If we'll have the next slide, please. So back in April, we added extra frequency on some of our busiest routes, and those are the ones, so it's 1 to Brighton Hill, 3 to South Ham, and the 8 to Campshot Park, and there's a blend in there from services which were naturally already showing good growth that we just needed to get on because we were approaching capacity, and there are others that we recognised we were holding back because we simply weren't running enough. And the trick for us now is to follow on that work in our next service change, which we'd be looking to do hopefully in the early part of next year for some of the other routes that so far have been stuck at much lower frequency than we had back in 2019. So that would be the 5 to West Popley, the 6 for East Popley and Winkelbury, and the 7 to Chinham, because at some point we recognise that we aren't going to get more people travelling with us if we don't put those services back on the road. At the moment, we're somewhere between 2,000 and 3/4 of the frequency, number of buses per day, that those areas would have had in 2019, and that is broadly proportionate to the number of people we've got travelling. Andrew's touched on this. We have been fortunate that one of the mechanisms to get more people travelling on the network in the past, or in 2023 so far, has been the £2 fare cap. In Basingstoke, that's had less impact because in an urban area our fares were at the less expensive end of the spectrum already, so the difference on the town network hasn't been as great as it has on some of the longer distance routes. It's probably one of the reasons why we have got a really good response rate from people in Tadley and Borghurst, because those fares were higher, but it's also helped us get more people travelling into the town from further afield. So our Borden and Alton route and from Hook, service 13, has responded quite well, and we've carried far more people on the link service to Kingsclear and Newbury than we ever really expected. We've got as many people now on its hourly frequency as we had when we were running it every 30 minutes, and that's one of the next ones that we know we really need to move into on that longer distance network. There are other actions we've taken as well. We haven't just altered our fares for the £2 single. We have slightly reduced the cost of our day rider, recognising that fewer people were buying that and instead just paying the £2. And we've also introduced new bundle day tickets, so that as a part-time customer you have the option of buying 5-day tickets for the price of 4, rather than a fixed 7-day-a-week ticket, which was all we offered back in 2019. There's obviously more that we'd like to do, and some of that we'll still be trying to run by ourselves commercially with the revenue we're getting in from our customers, but the money that Hampshire have got, we really hope should help kickstart us into the next phase of investment where we require extra vehicles or whole new journeys on the road. And we've put forward a few asks already at a very high level basis to Andrew and his team as to where we think we'll get the best commercial response to that. We really do want to see that any money that Hampshire have, if it's revenue funding, does go into services which will become commercially sustainable within the next 2 to 3 years. That's going to be a challenge, but we do think there are some evening, Sunday options where actually we are getting more people on other routes where we have those journeys, that we can start ramping up some of those gaps that people have asked us about historically. So we'll be keeping in contact obviously with Hampshire to see how quickly we can get things running. I'm very hopeful that that does help us get new services up and running within the next year or so. Staffing is a challenge. In Basingstoke, we continue to get more people through the door. We don't have one clear reason for people not wanting to be bus drivers, or indeed when they exit. There are a whole variety of different reasons. The whole road transport industry remains quite challenging. We've had phases where we know HGV was incentivised to some extent by central government, and that was particularly difficult. We've had licensing delays at DVLA, which slowed down the number of people we could put on the road. It is a slow burn getting people fully trained from scratch, and we do a lot of that in-house, but it does still take a really long time to recover from a lag from our shortfall. We've done as much as we can to make sure that we're not trying to run more buses in our timetables than we have drivers to cover. Our lost mileage is back down under 1%, which was, even the 1% was a number we never thought we'd ever get anywhere near 5 years ago, but it's a reality that we really struggled, certainly a year ago, and in different depots there have been sporadic spikes in that time. We do have more people with us, so we've got 107 people now. We've got more people at application and interview. They probably won't all make it through the list, but we are getting a good number through. It's just the reality. We know we'll get dropouts. That extra coming in is what we really need to help us get more people, to help us justify and run more buses on the ground. One of the things that we did to get a boost was advertise a £3,000 sign-on bonus through this month for anyone who is already a licence holder. One of our issues that we recognised post-2020 was the number of people who chose to not come back to us after furlough, or indeed try out lorry driving, and maybe that has or hasn't worked. So it's something we haven't done before. It's a little bit early to say what that full impact is. I think we have had a few through, and if that's something that works, then sporadically it's something we can try again in future.
Okay, and then just very quickly, final piece about fleet. I mentioned it at the beginning. The Department of Transport has announced what they call a zebra bid, which is a zero emission bus fund, where the government contributes 75% of the cost between a diesel bus and an alternative fuel bus, with the main cost of the vehicle and that remaining difference falling with the operator. So in effect, the operator pays 125%. And the government pays 75 to get to your 200% overall. In terms of infrastructure, very much a same scenario, with 75% of the capital costs being covered by the government. Our Basingstoke depot is a good depot in regards to be able to accommodate electrification. Some depots aren't. One of the things that the big challenge in the industry, or UK PLC really, is have we got a big enough cable that goes into the depot, or is there a big enough generator nearby the depot to supply it? That's a wider discussion, and we haven't got time for that right now, I would have thought. But we're very much focused on working with Hampshire County Council to put in some bids next month to try and see if we're successful in electrifying some of the fleet in Basingstoke. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions? Start off with Councillor. Councillor Bowes, to start off with. You missed out last time.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me. You say, and I understand obviously with staff shortages that cancellations of some services randomly are going to be a thing. Problem I've got with it is the live information on the app. Ironically, on the number 1 bus as well to Brighton Hill, so it may be why it hasn't recovered quite so rapidly. You're going to check to see whether the bus is still coming, and it shows that it's coming. Then it shows that it's late, and then it disappears off the screen and says it's been cancelled. I mean, somebody knew that bus was cancelled before it got out that far. So I think it might be helpful if the live information didn't just show what was supposed to have happened and actually showed what is happening. Just a suggestion, or possibly, hopefully, what will happen.
No, I understand that. Our control teams should be manually putting in the cancellations as and when they happen. It's sometimes isn't always possible to do that. That is the aim. I guess with Brighton Hill particularly, our main issue has been the roadworks that have decimated the service, to be honest, for most of the year. And that has also caused unpredictability in terms of when the bus comes through, because the round trip is quite short. It's only about 40 minutes, should be. Sometimes if you're looking ahead early, we don't know that that bus isn't coming back because it will get into town and the driver will be running so late that it's then taken out, and it might already have been due in Brighton Hill at that point. So the app will be predicting that the bus is coming back and it doesn't, because it was so late that we've had to take it out. So I'm hopeful. We've slowed down the service because we know that the roadworks have had such an impact. I'm hopeful that when that work is finished, we'll get back to a normal situation, and that really shouldn't happen.
I hope so too. Thank you. It seems to happen rather a lot at the moment.
Councillor Jones, followed by Councillor Phillimore.
Thank you. It's nice to see you here again. I'm a Southampton councillor, and one of the things I've been picking up is that you change certain routes, and we've got an old age generation in Southampton. I think it's the oldest in the town area. But we've got less buses now than we did have. I know it's a chicken and egg thing with the costs and everything else. But what I'm getting fed back by my residents, especially on the Berg in particular, is that they're running at the wrong times. They can't get back from town with their shopping, so therefore they either get their cars out. And a lot of these people don't want to drive. And I just wonder whether you, at some stage, should look at a pilot scheme to try and boost it. Same as they do in supermarkets. I know it's a different commodity, but if you don't run them, people ain't going to get on them, and that's the problem you've got and I've got, because they moan at me for not having buses. It's one of those things. But we seem to, you move bus shelters like Woodruff Drive in particular. There's a lady down there. She's blind. She moved there purposely because it was near a bus stop, and it stopped. You know, all right, you can't deal with individuals, but they're the issues we're coming across in Southampton. So that is why I think the numbers don't add up. People have given up.
Yeah, no, I understand where you're coming from, and it is a difficult scenario, because ideally we would want to run buses everywhere. I wake up in the morning to run buses. That's all I've done in my life, and I get a buzz out of it. So the more buses we can run, the better. It comes back to, you know, the demand, and sometimes we will kickstart things, and we've done that in certain towns already. That we did something more recently over in Surrey, where we'd reinvested some driver resource, because that's the usual constraint at the moment, some driver resource to enhance some frequencies to try and attract more passengers back. One of the challenges that we face nationwide as an industry is the concessionary pass holders. And for two reasons, that is. One is the government did a really good job in frightening people off the bus when COVID happened. Again, that's another 3-hour discussion session if you want, but that it was really effective. The second thing is, and my parents are the same, how do we go shopping? I spend an hour around my parents explaining how to order online on Sainsbury's using an iPad, and they've never gone back. And there's a lot of people that do that now. The winners are the Sainsbury's, the Asda, and the online, and they're also in the pool for drivers. So that demand for drivers has increased. Different license, but it's the same market, and that puts extra pressure on the demand for drivers that we can train. So I think there's a piece to be done nationally, and I think the DFT recognise this as well, of trying to get more concessionary pass holders back to the bus. But I also get the piece about if the bus isn't there, then what's the point in having a concessionary pass? It's horses for courses, and there's a chicken and egg and all sorts of things like that. But where we can, we do try and reinvest. It's just that we can't do it everywhere right now.
So why not do it in Basingstoke? Not Surrey. They're well off down there.
Councillor Phillimore.
Yeah, hi, once again, thanks for coming, everybody. Mine's a commercial question, really. Your 5% usage by school children and colleges, is that on scheduled services rather than taking specific schools on a commercial basis?
Most of our buses in Basingstoke are, in fact, all of them are local bus services. So there will be a mix of journeys, which, and generally those ones in the 600 series, which primarily really are taking children to school. But yes, they're part of that 5%. There are obviously others who travel on Service 1 to Brighton Hill just as anyone else does. So it's a bit of everything. But yeah, I guess my point fundamentally on that list was most of the things we're doing are all-day public buses. There's not that many that we do which are standalone just for primarily school children.
Councillor Ganesh.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for coming along. You mentioned that 70% to sort of a pre-COVID level on concessionary and 95% to pre-COVID on fare-paying passengers so far. And you've had another increase of 10% since that cap was introduced. So at what point you will be sort of thinking of increasing frequency or new pilot schemes to sort of increase bus presence in some of the rural area or some of the edges of the urban Basingstoke? And are we able to see the breakdown of that pre-COVID to current increase by route as a scrutiny members or working group members? Thank you.
Yeah, a lot of bits of that question, sorry. In terms of what we share, we do pass data across to Hampshire and Basingstoke and Dean officers anyway, and yes, at a reasonably high level, we're happy to do that as part of our ongoing partnerships with how we manage and develop the network. In terms of are we looking to put more resource into our more rural services, I guess in all honesty those are harder, particularly the ones to the genuinely rural locations like Steventon or Dummer or even Bramley, simply because actually the bus service there was relatively limited even back in 2019 because the audience was generally one which was not sustaining a commercial bus service already, and also generally with a higher weighting of concessionary pass holders, and all those things we've already talked about in terms of the balance of fare payers and pass holders are very much still true there. So unfortunately the more rural services in some cases have got weaker. Where there are more rural communities on the mainstream bus route, so whether that's on the link towards Newbury or out to Hook on the 13, generally they thrive, but by virtue of the pearls on the string approach of there being some large communities which do have a natural commercial flow. So there's not one clear answer in all honesty. In terms of what's stopping us putting buses on the road, again, it's a mix of everything. It's a bit of what does our revenue limit allow us to do, and we need to be really careful with that because government subsidies are ultimately phasing back out and we don't expect them to be permanent. So we do still need to be sustainable at the end. It's honestly, it's still our driver resource as well. We recognise that we can't try and run more than we have drivers to fulfil. So whilst that's improving, we're not there yet, and we are having to be careful what we do and in what order.
Councillor Basham, finally.
Thanks, Chair. It's a question for Mark, really. You've got some of the council here. What's the one thing that Basingstoke and Dean Council could do to boost bus transport or bus usage in Basingstoke? You know, if you had your wish list with you.
Well, with you working with Hampshire County Council, the best way to make buses more attractive is, as I mentioned earlier, is to make them go faster than the cars on their journey time. That is the way usually that attracts more passengers. In my experience, and Andrew can vouch for this as well, I've worked in the south of the county, and by making buses bypass really congested roads does make more people travel by bus, no question about it. Easier said than done, but you asked, and that's my wish list.
Thank you very much.
Can I cheekily add a second thing? Planning for me. I'd like to see a really tight link between planning, consented development and highways management, and that falls between yourselves as well as Hampshire. We've got a really good traditional network within historic Basingstoke, if you like, where our roads are bus accessible on all the routes we run today. That's looking far more challenging on things coming forward, and we already have areas north of Popley Sheffield Park is another one, and golf course Hampson Field, which might all be more difficult to serve by bus in the years to come, and we can't see all those cars tipped onto the network because they will just cause us other issues.
I don't know the answer to this, but colleagues might. Is that a function of our delay, our lack of 5-year housing supply and speculative development, or is that driven by something else?
I think it's driven by the way that some of these estates are designed and worked out rather than our land supply position.
That's enormously helpful, thank you.
Yes, and historically, it's the fact that standards for access to the cars onto these new developments have changed over the years. If you're quoting Sheffield Park, for instance, it goes back to pre-2000. So it's historical and built into the system, unfortunately. Gentlemen, once again, thank you very much.
Having trouble operating the chair, I'm afraid.
Be comfortable, Peter.
If you can just see a pair of glasses. No, I'll be fine. I'll be fine. Good evening. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Peter Smith. I'm a senior transport officer here at Basingstoke and Dean, and my function primarily is to perform a liaison for the Borough Council with Stagecoach and with Hampshire County Council to the benefit of our residents and our budget at the bottom line, I suppose. So we've heard some good news stories from Stagecoach and Hampshire County Council about money and everything, but it's important to note that we also support public transport, not to quite the same degree, but in a different way as Hampshire County Council and central government, excuse me. What I'm going to do, I'm going to talk about public bus and community transport quite separately because they serve a sort of a different demographic. So I think it's important that we actually section them apart. So Basingstoke and Dean, we support journey times within core routes. We actually only support one major route with Hampshire County Council in Basingstoke. And we also support rural services as well, which I note that you were talking about earlier on. And in terms of community transport, we've got two community transport services, one for Old Basing and one for Whitchurch, which serve in a very, very different way from the public bus. They provide a service where the bus wouldn't normally be able to get into into residential roads, and they also provide assistance with those people getting on and off buses with less mobility, less ambulant than everyone else. We also support Basingstoke Connect with Hampshire County Council, which you will probably recognise as Diaride. And we've been doing that for a number of years now. So very, very quickly, I'll run through the support for town services and public bus out of town services. We support journeys within 5 routes within Basingstoke and Dean now. We support the Friday and Saturday evening services, and Stagecoach do the Monday to Thursday ones on certain routes. We support fully the Oakley number 11 on Sundays and bank holidays, and we also support in rural, well, it does run into town, the Dummer to the town centre on a Monday, Wednesday and Friday basis. And that costs the council in the region of £194,000 per annum. The public bus out of town services, we run 2, Bishop's Green, which provides a link for the Bishop's Green people to get into Newbury, but also provides them with a service up to the main A339, which they wouldn't normally have, and we've been running that for about 25 odd years now. And we operate a Thursday only service with assistance from with Wokingham Borough Council and the local Beach Hill Parish Council. And those 2 services cost us about £27,000 per annum. In terms of community transport, the old Basing service runs into town via Chinham. Very, very successful service. It used to be run as a taxi share. Then it got so popular that we couldn't get everyone in the same taxi. So we run a local bus service. Basingstoke Community Transport operate that for us. And they also operate the Whitchurch local service via Leverstoke. And we get a contribution from Whitchurch Town Council to operate that. And that operates on 3 days per week. And that costs us about £37,000 a year. Now, in terms of Dial-A-Ride, Basingstoke Connect, we we spend about 62% of the total contract, and Hampshire County Council 38%. So we are the major holder of that contract, but Hampshire County Council operate that on our behalf. So our total support for public transport is in the region of £430,000 a year, which it supplements everything else that the county does for us. So that's a really high level trot through of what we actually support. So if anyone's got any questions, I can take them now.
Thank you, Peter. Councillor Ferrymore.
Yeah, hi Pete. Thanks for coming. I think some of these questions might be for Andy as well. Thanks for listening. Firstly, is the 429 the total budget figure? Is it the exact figure? Is it an underspend or an overspend? And secondly, the community transport on here is only the stuff that we pay for. There are other services on here that are paid for. Well, certainly in Overton, the Overton Community Bus is paid for 100% by Overton Parish Council. So probably my question is, who decides who gets support?
Right, your first question, your 430 odd thousand pounds. That is what we pay. That is what we actually pay out through contracts and support. The Overton service is quite interesting, and you will probably remember that did used to be run or funded by Basingstoke and Dean Borough Council. Hampshire County Council then contracted that out through another provider, and they, as part of another review we had back in, I think it was 2014, the decision was taken that we would no longer fund that, and that would be funded through money from Hampshire County Council. What's happened to that service in terms of funding after that decision was made? You say that Overton fund that 100%. I'm not aware of that.
I don't know who else pays for it then. Who else pays for it?
Any other questions? Well, one more. Go on.
And this is for Andy as well, and not for you, Pete, really. Is there a piece of work that we feel necessary to investigate the resurrection of a park and ride system in the town, and certainly with enhancing footfall in the town centre and parking charges, etc.?
I'll take that question. Chair, I'm sitting next to the chairman of the Task and Finish group, and she's taken that one on board.
Marvellous.
Councillor Ganesh.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Pete. So we've heard from the operator that extending our bus service further to the rural is one of the difficult tasks that we've got ahead. So the way forward is definitely community transport. How we thought, or should we consider the voluntary driver scheme similar to one Surrey County Council has, which has been successful in a number of villages and the edges of Surrey County. Thank you.
I think historically we've already worked with organisations like Neighbour Care over the years to support them in kind of reaching out to communities where they can offer more tailored services to get people to particular places where they need to be, where there's not a bus service. So that's how we've traditionally worked with those kind of operators, as it were. I think there's always room to look at other examples from elsewhere, and perhaps that's something that we can also pick up through the tasking for this group potentially.
Yes, go on.
So, should we think about some sort of the council-sponsored scheme rather than we work with the voluntary sector or third sector? Should we consider a scheme that probably might bring more voluntary drivers into the scheme and train them and pay them per mileage or something like that? Thank you.
May I? I think we're drifting into an area where the Task and Finish group is actually developing itself as its own work program, because I think these topics, because we all can contribute from our own particular wards and our own particular circumstances, and I think that can be done internally. But Task and Finish groups can reach out to Stagecoach. They can reach out through officers to the other stakeholders in this particular arena, and get the answers from them or get the suggestions from them. But I think you're absolutely right. We've raised it in the right place here during this particular presentation. We've taken it on board, and as I said right at the beginning of the meeting this evening, we're able to progress this. The one thing I dislike intensely is raise a topic at a committee and then it just fizzles out. But we've got the mechanism now to be able to address these issues later on, and it will come back to this committee eventually. So thank you very much. I'm going to call a halt there for Peter. Thank you very much, Peter. And go to our last speaker, please, Mark. Good evening, Rob. And I will try and keep you to about 7 or 8 minutes max.
I feel like I have a bad rep for some reason. I don't know why. Licensed trade, interesting one for all local authorities insofar as that we have quite a lot of control over some elements of this and very little control over others. So private hire, pre-booked journeys only, we've got basically very little control over that. There are obviously Alpha is the name that everybody knows, but actually we've got 76 other operators within the borough. So those journeys are pre-booked and they charge what they like. And if you they don't like what they're charging, you phone another one. Simple as that. Hackney carriages are a very different kettle of fish. So in Basingstoke, they operate predominantly out of the station rank. I would love them to operate more widely, but that's where they live at this point in time. And they have a very different ethos in there insofar as that we set the tariff as an authority, and we set the fees that they pay for their vehicles and the drivers and everything else. So the Hackney carriage trade is a lot more controlled by us as an authority. Yep, there you go. Our key issue has been drivers. And in the same way that Stagecoach and other bus operators have suffered in the pandemic, so have the licensed trade. Obviously in the pandemic, everybody stayed at home, so nobody was taking any cabs, so lots of taxi drivers were sat there fiddling their fingers with nothing better to do, and then everybody started buying everything online. And suddenly there was a massive demand for light van drivers and deliveries and Deliveroo and Uber Eats and all those things. So we saw a mass exodus out of the trade, and that situation is now starting to recover as the economy gets back to normal. But as you can see, for a number of years through the pandemic, we had very low numbers of new drivers. I'm pleased to say that our driver numbers are picking up, but they are still below where we were before. And that is reflected in the number of vehicles again. As you can see, we had 410 licensed vehicles in 1920, and that number declined steadily through to 2022. We're now seeing that picking up again. That growth is entirely within the private hire trade. And if you look at the Hackney carriage numbers, the little red blocks at the bottom there, you can see that our Hackney carriage numbers continue to decline. for reasons that we'll cover next. So what are we doing to help the trade? So we're streamlining the application pack. Drivers are exceptionally heavily regulated and checked, which keeps us all safe. That's what we do. But obviously it means it's not a straightforward path. So making that application as straightforward as we can do. Rewriting the driver handbook to focus very much on what drivers need to know. Our policy is a bit of a whopper, not to put too fine a point on it, and it's not very accessible to drivers. So we've done a shorter handbook, which makes it easier for them. And lastly, removal of the geographical element of the driver test for private hire drivers. So again, this is one of the tests that we make sure that drivers know what they're doing in a whole range of things, whether that be taxi law, whether that be highway code, and traditionally we've had a geographical element. For the case of private hire drivers, everything they do is driven off an app these days, and the app tells them where to go, when to go, how to get there, and how to get back again. So as such, their need for geographical knowledge is less than that of a Hackney carriage driver. So we've removed that element from the test. Hackney carriage drivers, I don't think you need to have a degree in demographics to see that we have a problem. And our problem here is quite simple. We have a very ageing number of drivers. And one of the things that we are looking to do is to try and encourage younger drivers into the Hackney carriage trade. The biggest single barrier that prevents that is the cost of the vehicle. And again, as with the case of Hackney carriage, we don't specify anything for private hire, but for Hackney carriage, we do specify that it is a London-style taxi. And they are expensive because at the moment you can only buy them from one company in the country, which is London Electric Vehicle Company, and they're 65k. Which obviously is quite a barrier to entry. So that gives us a challenge. And the other thing that's giving us a challenge is that we have a 12-year age limit. And the reason for that is because that gets the horrible, cluttery, polluting, noisy, smelly ones off the rank. Most of the horrible, noisy, smelly, cluttery ones are going to be going very shortly because they're the Euro 4s, which is the little blue area in there. And as you can see, our biggest area now is the Euro 6, which is our cleanest vehicles. But obviously, it doesn't take a genius to hear that we'd love to move towards more battery electric or hybrid vehicles if they become available. As I said, national shortage of Hackney carriage vehicles. That's a problem for them. A lot of drivers used up their reserves to get them through COVID. Simple as that. So those drivers who had invested and had made some savings and were there are now struggling to do that. And the simple cost of these vehicles is a barrier to drivers. So we are actively looking at a variety of ways that we can support the trade and transition into new vehicles. That's a very proactive line for us at the moment. That is, however, not a straightforward matter to do. We have to make sure that we are meeting the council's requirements with regard to procurement and issues of a more legal and technical nature. But we are making some progress with that, and hopefully in a few months' time we'll be able to bring you some better news. That's it.
Thank you very much. Right on the nose. Councillor Basham.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, Rob. I guess I'm asking you, but actually this is probably going to go straight to Jackie for the Task and Finish group. Grants for scrappage for Euro 4 emission Hackney carriages to convert them into LEVs, if that was the right phrase, and or grants for younger drivers who want to purchase a vehicle, and or this council's got quite a strong balance sheet, so I know there'll be regulatory reasons, etc. But could we investigate whether we operate like a Bank of Dave for new Hackney drivers. I think I had some other ideas, but that's probably enough for now.
I can safely reassure you that our thoughts are on the same lines. We are looking at different schemes to do that. There, as I said, there are some technical and legal issues with those, but we are making good progress with that. And obviously, I would love to see a nice shiny fleet of new low emissions vehicles sat on our rank. And I know that the portfolio holder is very supportive of that as well. So yes, we will be pushing that way. And as soon as I have some firm news for you, there will be some news for you.
Councillor Ganesh.
Thank you, Rob, for the paper. It's nice to hear that we have 76 operators, but in reality, we wouldn't get more than 3 or 4 if we search or call in any time of the day. The average waiting time during peak hours in the morning is more than 45 minutes. Friday, Saturday night is more than 1 hour and 15 minutes after 10 o'clock until 2 o'clock in the morning. I have experienced it. I have had a number of residents talk to me about it in the past, and we've talked a lot about a lot of the barriers, and we've talked about the aging population of drivers, and the best way to encourage youngsters is to introduce more app-based companies who can enter into trade. I'm aware that we have contacted 11 operators earlier this year. I would like to hear the progress on those, and I would like to hear what are the schemes that would encourage more people to enter into trade. One, more youngsters to use the cars, not just the Hackney carriage, but the other the cars that can be used. To be specific, any online-based operator who allows them to use. How can, as an authority or as councillors, how can we change the things that allow them to do that? Thank you.
We'll go for the U word then. So, Uber. Uber are not coming to Basingstoke. Neither is Vesa, neither is Bolt. They ain't coming for a very simple reason. We are way too small. These are companies who can only operate in dense urban areas with high numbers of short journeys where there is a large population and a large number of vehicles available. Basingstoke singly fails to tick any of those boxes. So you're right, we wrote to a number of the bigger operators to ask them whether they would be interested in coming to Basingstoke, and the answer was no, we're not. It's nothing personal. There are hundreds of other towns and cities across the country who don't have any of these services because they're too small. So they are simply not coming to Basingstoke. Virtually all the companies that are operating within Basingstoke at this point in time all operate electronic driver control systems. All the drivers will have a PDA, personal digital assistant, in their vehicle, their mobile phone, and they will receive their jobs and work their jobs off those devices. So that's the way the industry has gone. You know, that has to be the way they operate today. And, you know, there is no longer somebody sat in an office with a big book and a telephone and a radio. Those days went out with, you know, in the 1970s. It's all that base now. The issue for all the issues is whether they can recruit enough drivers and get enough vehicles. As I explained to you in the presentation, we are doing our best to streamline those processes. We have been successful. Our numbers of new drivers is rising consistently every month. And we are now in a situation where there is a positive growth within the trade. Unfortunately, one of the side effects of COVID has been that quite a lot of people have decided to work from home. They've downsized. A lot of people who had 2 cars now have 1 car, and their theory is that they will use a Hackney carriage or a private hire vehicle when they need a second vehicle. So demand has increased whilst availability has decreased. Would I wish it the other way? Absolutely, I would. Are we doing everything we can to work with the trade, and we do actively meet with the trade and actively support the trade in this regard? Then the answer to that is yes, we do as well. But this is a UK-wide problem. Every town and city is experiencing the same issue.
Councillor Fenimore, make this the last question, please.
It's not a question, Chair. I'm going to defer to the end.
Councillor Jones, is a question?
Yeah, it's, I know the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Everything's run from the centre in Basingstoke. That's the way it's been built. Now, people living at Tadley, Whitchurch and out, there's never a taxi service there. Perhaps that's something we should be looking at, whether we can do anything as a borough council, because I lived in Whitchurch for a short period of time. You phone for a taxi, and 9 times out, it comes from Basingstoke. Of course, they don't want to go out there. They've got to travel, come back. It's not financially viable for some of the drivers. They don't like it. They do it, but, you know, I just wondered whether long term we should be looking to see if we could spread the service somehow. I don't know how, because it's commercial. I do accept that, but you know.
You might as well ask me to manage the distribution of shoe shops. They are where people are, and yeah, they probably don't buy many shoes that time of week, though. The issue here is simply one of supply and demand. I would also say, however, that all too often there are drivers and small independent businesses that are out in the sticks, and you know, you have a local taxi driver, yeah. The difficulty is generally it's a 1 or 2 person band, yeah. They tend to focus on running people to the shops and to the chemist and the doctor's surgery. And if you want them at 3 o'clock in the morning, strangely enough, they're tucked up in their bed getting their beauty sleep at that time. But they do provide that service during the day. But the nighttime economy is exceptionally poorly served in those areas, Tony. Wouldn't disagree with you. But again, we have no power to tell any part of the trade, not even the Hackney trade, which we have most control over, where they should or shouldn't be.
I do realise that. It's just my view was that, what my thoughts are, that perhaps is the advertising or something. Because, as I say, I lived in Whitchurch for a very short period of time, a few months, 6 months if that. And when you wanted a taxi, you think, oh, there should be one round here somewhere. There's nothing, and perhaps we should be talking to the parish councils or something like that, what they can do. I don't live there no more, so it's not a personal thing, but it is something that's comes up.
Thank you very much, Rob. Appreciate that. I think we all live, in our communities. We really do recognise a lot of the things you've flagged up, and yes, I think the question you just put, or the points you just put, Tony, is well taken. Fine. Thank you very much. And I'd like to thank. Well, is it a question? I'm trying to bring this to a conclusion.
It's a very important comment, I think.
Well, is it a comment? Does it go to the officer or to Rob for a written response?
It doesn't go to Rob. I was waiting for Rob to finish.
Well, that's why I want to sign that off. If you've got another question to possibly the portfolio holder.
I certainly have. And yourself.
Thank you very much, Rob. Appreciate it. Mark, do you want to sum up on that?
Thanks, Chair. That's been really helpful, members, just to give us an outline of your kind of areas of concern. I'm sure with Councillor Tustain, we've noted down a number of kind of issues we want to delve into in the task and finish group. We'll certainly compare notes afterwards, but some of the things I noted down were around the pilot services in the rural areas. There was something around park and ride services in the town, making the most and encouraging, facilitating more voluntary drivers. There was some conversation around grants for taxis and encouraging younger drivers into the trade effectively. And there was some further comment around the taxi trade generally, which we could explore in a bit more detail down the line. I'm sure Councillor Tustain may have noted down a few additional ones as well.
Believe you me, she's made a lot of notes. Right, thank you very much. And Councillor Fillimore, I'm going to go to the portfolio holder in a minute to sum up the point you were going to make.
The point I was going to make, Chair, is the title of the paper is Transport Update. And apologies to our friends up with four wheels, but should we, or I, just be disappointed that there's no mention of new rail stations on this paper? Is that something that can be considered by the Task and Finish Group? I'm suggesting Chinham and Manydown / Oakley.
I think Chinham, being a ward member there, has been done to death over 25 years. And why it keeps coming up, well, I think we know the answer, and that's British Rail. And they screwed it by putting in the Green Park station. And they just do not have the capacity on the line. I'll leave that one where it is, and I'll pass it over to Councillor Kozinetska.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you everybody for your comments and questions this evening. I'm genuinely excited actually by this Task and Finish Group. There's so many interesting points that have been raised, and that can potentially make a big difference to our borough. So wish you all the best with that. I'm here to help in any way I can, and I look forward to seeing the presentation when it's ready. So thank you all again for that, and thank you to everyone from Hampshire County Council, from Stagecoach, and our own officers as well for their time this evening.
Fine, and I'll echo those to all our visitors. Thank you very much for coming. That was very valuable. We're going to move on to the agenda item number 6, which is the updated council plan. Evening, Councillor Harvey. Councillor James, I take it you're doing a dual presentation of this evening? Off you go, Councillor Harvey, and welcome this evening.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Committee, for hearing us this evening on our updated council plan before you this evening. The amended council plan looks to directly address the priorities that the people, the partners and businesses have clearly shared over many years with the council. It seeks to build on the council plan published earlier this year and define our early priorities as a new administration. We are building on the council plan and amending and updating it, and our focus is on 3 core priorities, just as before. Making the place we live, work and enjoy the very best it can be, focusing on pride in our place. Being clear that we take the climate and ecological emergency seriously, and that is a core thread running throughout the work of this council. And that our council services are critical to our residents, and they rightly deserve the focus and attention that we're giving them. These 3 core priorities reinforce and build on the original plan's 3 priorities, and the actions and the words of this plan flow from these, and again build on what was already in the plan. Our flavour of our focus includes key actions adding to the existing actions of the plan, such as delivering a local plan that reduces the housing number, working within the current straitjacket of national government laws that we all want to see changed. Given that we are inheriting a dwindling supply of affordable housing, we are focusing on the delivery of more affordable homes, and specifically socially rented homes, and we're developing an enhanced partnership with our leading social housing providers to meet this need. We talk about delivering a university for Basingstoke, delivering on Manydown, focusing on the regeneration of the top of town as a start to plans for the future of the town centre, introducing a livability standard to guide and shape the future of existing development. We're driving forward and we're very clear on our renewed focus of regeneration for Buckskin, South Ham and Winkleberry. The delivery of a new aquadrome, but also the wider renewal of our leisure park, We know how important it is to people to see that the regeneration and renewal of our leisure facilities is carried forward. We wholly support the work of our CSPOs, and in partnership, and the work we do alongside our local police force, we welcome the new policing reforms to bring back neighbourhood policing and area cars. Our commitment to tackling climate change and the ecological emergency can be seen in our actions to introduce solar power on council buildings, our desire to deliver an ambitious biodiversity strategy, and our commitment, despite recent government proposals, to protect our rivers and chalk streams. We value all of our precious water assets, and we will ensure we meet the commitments to improve the quality of our rivers and tributaries in accordance with our local plan, but also the Environment Act and the water regulations. We recognise the threat posed by pollution. We want to see our parks and open spaces improved. So moving forward with the longer term plans for the future of Eastrop Park or developing proposals for accessibility, such as an improved programme of investment in play areas, across all of the borough adds to putting the needs of our residents first. We will invest in the cleaner streets and enhanced grounds maintenance. We recognise the challenges that people face also with the cost of living crisis, and how the economic uncertainty that we all face as residents and businesses is directly impacting people's lives. We recognise that Basingstoke and Deane is an inclusive borough, so we will be developing an anti-poverty strategy. Basingstoke and Deane is a growing and diverse community, and we will seek to do all we can to celebrate that community, and our focus will be on empowerment and inclusion for all communities in the borough. We very clearly set out what we wish to achieve through this amended council plan, building on the work that has already started, both in collaboration with our residents, in partnership with our partners, both public and private, but also with our workforce, our amazing workforce in this authority. So the amendments that we've made reflect our starting point as a new administration, building and updating, but clearly driving, and our focus will be on delivery. Thank you for allowing me to introduce the bill.
Thank you very much. Now, I do have one visiting councillor to speak, Councillor Lee. If I could ask you to come forward. And you have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Having compared both the current plan and this amended version, I was impressed with the direction the new administration wishes to take this borough. I feel that this document lays out a vision that goes beyond mere words and rhetoric. It's a vision that imagines Basingstoke and Deane as a well-designed haven of beauty, built on sustainable communities and dedicated to protecting the most vulnerable in our society. It's a promise to build more social rented housing, to support active, healthy communities and to safeguard our natural environment. But what truly sets this amended plan apart is its focus on the very heart of our communities, on neighbourhoods and areas that have long deserving of attention. Seeing Winklebury explicitly called out has certainly been welcomed. For years, residents of Winklebury have been promised change, and for too long, those promises have remained unfulfilled. For too long, they have been let down. But today, we have before us a commitment to collaborative regeneration between communities and housing associations. Winklebury, Buckskin, Southam, these are more than just names on a map. They represent communities that have been waiting for regeneration, and it's time that we, as a council, deliver on our promises. I know that the leader and other members of the Cabinet have already been working hard to address the concerns around the Winklebury regeneration, and I look forward to meeting with Councillor Harvey to hear how it's progressing. Then there's Manydown, land that was purchased when I was a 13-year-old boy, who certainly wouldn't have thought that he would be talking about the importance of it being delivered nearly 30 years after it was purchased. Manydown represents a significant opportunity for this borough, not just for housing, but for well-planned development that meets the needs of our communities. It signifies a commitment to creating attractive, well-designed environments that we can all be proud to call home. The words beautiful places to live resonate with the aspiration of every resident, and this plan makes it a driving force. But this plan isn't just about housing. It's about the entire ecosystem of our borough. It's about fostering a thriving economy, supporting small businesses, encouraging innovation and unlocking entrepreneurial talent. Leisure, culture, arts and the engagement of our local young people are all at the forefront of this plan. It's about promoting healthy lifestyles, encouraging participation in sports and cultural activities and supporting the incredible community, charitable and voluntary sector that plays such a pivotal role in our borough. It acknowledges the role of small businesses as the bedrock of our economy and celebrates the contribution of large companies in showcasing our economic strength. It represents a remarkable step forward and a blueprint for a borough that is not just a place to live, but a place to thrive. But let us not forget that a plan is only as effective as its execution. It is our collective responsibility as members of this council to work together to ensure that the vision becomes a reality.
You have 1 minute.
The measures to monitor the plan need to align closely with other measures that are documented across the variety of policies that we have within the borough. I would like to see explicitly who is responsible for each action, whether that be us as a council, HCC, BVA, or whoever it may be, so that we, in the scrutiny committees, can scrutinise them should measures start to be missed. It's time to turn these words into actions, to transform promises into progress, and to make Basingstoke and Dean a shining example of what a forward-thinking and compassionate borough can achieve. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lee. In time, yes. Always pleased when that happens. I just invite Chief Executive. Do you want to add anything to this at the moment?
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I'm going to open this up to debate and any questions from the committee to either the two co-presenters of this draft update, and if they want to address the Chief Executive, he's here to answer any questions. So I open it up to the committee. Councillor Jones.
Yeah, well, it's nice to have a decent plan, but the problem we have, or we did have, is Basingstoke's been, in my view, has been run down for a number of years, especially in the older estates and things like that. And I see things are changing, but we need to get this message out to the people. It's no good just talking to us. We've got to get it out there, what the development's all about, how it's going to make their lives better. Because the problem we had with many down, and still do to an extent, they want to do this to the roads and that to the roads, which affects another area, but because it's new, it's got to be done. And that is where I get annoyed with our planning, not our officers, but the general planning. If it's new, the people who are already living here, they have to suffer. We should be looking to get them on board and ask what they want from some of this development so that it doesn't affect them detrimentally, which at one stage, people went, for instance, in Old Kempshire Lane, they were coming, if they're coming back from the Whitchurch area down that road, they would have had to go past their turning to turn right. You know, it doesn't sound a big problem, but if you live there, there's nothing more annoying than you go down to a roundabout and come back up. And you know what's going to happen. People are saying, excuse me, you know, I'm going. But we need to start looking and bringing people on board, residents of where we live. That's all I would say. And it's nice to see a clear-cut plan.
No, I really welcome that. I think one of the first things we said, and we said it on the night of full council back in May, was trying to change the nature of how we do politics in this place and then reflect that back to residents. Because if we are all ward councillors at the end of the day that want the very best for our wards and our communities, that's why we are here. And if we can reflect that in what we do and how we do it, then that begins to rebuild that faith in politics that a lot of people feel has taken a big hit in recent years. So the very first thing is not to promise what you can't deliver. That's the key point. Don't overpromise what you cannot deliver. And when you work with people, do it collaboratively. And I think there's a nature of how we go about this whole delivery of the updated council plan, of what was already being delivered, that we have added to and is now taken to the next level in terms of where the new administration would like to take the council. So I think there's a whole range of things in working with you. For example, on Buckskin and South Ham in the future, where those communities have been promised an awful lot over many years. Now what we need to do is to take those communities with us on a journey where they have faith in what we want to do with them. Not to them, but with them. And that's going to take you and your colleagues working with us to achieve that in those wards, to actually see those residents have faith in politics. So for me, that's what this is all about, delivery and product on the other end of it. So I also pick up Councillor Lee's points about the KPIs and the measurable indicators, and the officers are very much aware of that in how we will take it forward. And it was debated in this committee at the last meeting, because that was an important part of, well, where do we go to hold ourselves to account?
Councillor Jones?
That sounds good, and I think that's the right way forward. But can I just say that things do go wrong with plans, but as a ward councillor, I want to know. I don't want to hear later on that there's a problem. So can you make sure that all the ward councillors where you're doing these plans are kept up to date, and it doesn't come as a surprise when you get a email or whatever from residents? Do you know this is happening?
I think part of doing that, this sort of doing it with you and doing it for you rather than doing it to you, is the critical bit. It does not matter what colour rosette you happen to choose to wander around the streets of Basingstoke and Dean in April. You're currently the ward representative, and so you should be very much part of the process because you're the spokesman for the 7,500 people there. So this isn't a cabinet is going to do this. This is, we are coming to you to say this is what we've got. How do you want to influence it? So it's got to be done with you. So you absolutely have our commitment.
If I can just put something in, and it's, I think, a common thing right across the board, and I think the things that Councillor Jones has just brought up, is communication. And I think this runs as a thread that runs all the way through any kind of plan, especially one as complex as any local borough plan has got to be. KPIs. I live my life on KPIs. And I went through here, and there's a heading of measures to test how we're going to do it. Very general headings in here. Those are the ones that are going to have to be distilled. Some of them come later. We can't sit around a table in a room like this and identify KPIs. It doesn't work like that. It's when you start your projects. Let's take those regeneration projects. As you start it, you then start to see how a program, whatever program, how it comes together to regenerate those particular areas. Then your KPIs will start to drop out when you realize how big the program is, because it's a huge, huge task. And I've been a program manager in my time, and that's when you start to distill it. And it's not something that comes all of a sudden. It appears as you progress, and I think that's something that, again, communication, needs to be explained to people. It's not a magic thing that comes out of a box. As things progress, the communication tells them how it's progressing, and what they can expect, and its expectations, I think, is the theme coming up here of what the public want to expect. But tell them.
I mean, no council plan stands in aspic. Everything evolves, nothing stands still, everything moves forward. That which was in March now becomes what we're proposing now as an update, and it will change in the future again. The point is, you're right about communication. And one of the most interesting parts since May has been the ability of our administration now, with the Chief Executive as well, to go out and talk to all our partners, begin to have those conversations with our partners and conversations with communities about their priorities, about what they feel is important. It isn't something you just do in a survey, although we will do that again. The next council survey will be coming up within the next, we do it every 2 years, there'll be another point. But it's that constant communication, it is that constant reinforcement of relationships that make this authority stand apart from many others, because we're able to broker some of the solutions that many others can't. So when it comes to regeneration, it's what this authority can do with our partners in an enhanced role to achieve the product that we want on the end of it, which is those residents feeling as if their community is being well and truly looked after for not just now, but 30 years in the future. This is about long politics. If we're serious about the borough, this isn't about the next 3 or 4 years. This is about doing things that will transform our borough over the next 30 years and have that real important impact that we all want it to have.
I just want to remind the committee of what the recommendation is on this particular paper. I'll read it out. It's only a line and a half. To consider the updated council plan, I hope we've all had a chance to read it, and to make recommendations to Cabinet. So if we can couch our thoughts in those particular ways. Councillor Tustain.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to echo something Councillor Lee said in talking about the who does what, because we do have lists in some of these things where there's quite a lot of people, and that's one thing. And also taking on board some of the comments about how we see progress that's been made. And what I would like to do in the same way, talking again from Councillor Miller was talking about project and programme management, is where we have got things that define a measurable progress thing, that we actually report back on that progress, even if it's only every other quarter potentially here, so that we can cross-reference that to see how it goes. It might be just a report that comes out, you know, I'm not talking, you don't go into an awful lot of detail, but at least ways it just says, if it says, for example, plans in place, are those plans in place? And I know, I'm looking at Sue, because I know we have obviously our KPIs and things, but it does, we're not talking about something that's a lot of detail, but something that is just gives the evidence to show that this is the plan, this is what we said we're doing, this is what we said we're measuring against. Are we doing it? Basically, just something as simple as that.
You're absolutely right. And obviously, the council plan sits up there. Then there's underneath it, there's a budget that's going to meet it, and then that means that's when the strategies will flow out and go to the various committees, and that will have more of the KPIs in it. The only thing to be mindful of is obviously with a council plan, it's our vision, and you'll see within the council plan, same as it was last time round, it's broken into 3 sections. There are things that we can do, that we can just choose to do, subject to having the funding to do it. There are things that we can do in partnership with others, and there's things that we need to influence others to do. So, I mean, we know when we look through the responses to the resident survey, health services really wind them up, and I totally get that. We've been very careful. We'd love to see them improve. We'd love you to be able to pick up a phone and get through to a GP surgery and not be 49th in the queue despite ringing at 8:21, which was the first minute you could ring. But that's down to GP surgeries, so we can sit in a room, we can hassle, we can fuss, but we don't want KPIs for that because we can't deliver that. We can only influence it. So as we go through, I think you're absolutely right, but we've got to just frame it into things that we can do, because we're very clear about not going out and promising a load of stuff that we can't do. You know, other people go out and promise new hospitals by 2027, and they get shifted. We're not doing that. If we can't deliver it, we'll say we can't deliver it. We'll try and influence others.
Russell.
Thank you. I was just going to add on the monitoring and the performance measures and targets. So in terms of process, obviously you're considering a draft updated plan. It will then go to Cabinet and on to Council, because it's a Council decision. Assuming Council adopt the updated plan, that then leads to all the service plans for each service area being updated alongside the budget process for next year, and the KPIs and all the performance measures are updated as part of that process, and will come through Cabinet for approval, and that's obviously driven by those measures that are in the updated Council plan, assuming it's obviously adopted by Council.
Thank you. Yes, I think we are talking in the same lines, and I'm not looking for a massive 300-page report to wade through over a weekend of going into all the detail. But what I'm talking, quite simply, I think it is just a way of being able to have that cross-reference of evidence against the plan that says, yes, we are doing it, because otherwise the things get lost where one thing says it's apples and pears. So it's just making sure you've got that flow through, and at health, and just, you know, it's at simple levels, you know, and obviously there are things, as you say, Gavin, about the like GP surgeries that are out there, and so therefore it's like, you know, beyond control, etc. But just, you know, obviously things we can do. Let's make sure we're doing them and show people that we're doing them.
Councillor Basham.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of observations for Cabinet, and they're really operational and to consider in conjunction with officers. One is there's quite a lot of references to resident satisfaction in the Council Fit for the Future section on page 29. I know in the past, I think at full council, people have raised some aspirations that we could be more effective in seeking resident feedback, and so obviously it's down to Cabinet officers to work out how we do that, but to see some new ways of engaging with residents and or seeking broader feedback that we can have more confidence in would be a great addition. And the other observation was just right on the last page of that section. It talks about supporting and developing our people to enable a values-based organisational culture that supports effective delivery, HR and OD service. I had HR committee this week, and we had the JCC the week before. I have to say, the HR function is impressive, and the investment in our people is impressive. I did ask a question about values again at one or both of those meetings, and I was trying to pin down a time frame for that. I understand that work's been held off while we finish the pay and benefits review, which makes absolute sense. But let's not let that drift.
Thank you. I think from our point of view, I think definitely agree in terms of the time frame on values, and I know the HR team take that view as well. So, point well made. I think in terms of the values, that was a very successful piece of work that started. Obviously, things then changed in the context of the workload and what they needed to focus on, and returning to that now and actually fulfilling that as the debate that was had in that particular committee meeting is worth it. It's interesting you talk about resident feedback, and I think that's important. Some of us get really frustrated, don't we, with other authorities that we share relationships with, for example, county councils and the way they go about their consultation processes. How many years have we all stressed ourselves over the way things happen? I think a very interesting piece of work is going on in the authority, and it flows from this trying to change the way we do things. Consulting people and just going out and consulting for the sake of it is one thing. Collaborating with people where you engage with them in a way you get substantive feedback changes the nature of what satisfaction means to people. If it's just a resident survey we conduct every 2 years and that becomes the basis of your council plan, that's fine, you can do that. But we're trying to say, let's be a bit more substantive in this. If we're going to have a collaborative approach, then that involves some change. And that actually is being worked on as we speak by our officer team in terms of how we can go about achieving that. So that's been quite an important, I think, culture change, if you like, in the way we would approach engaging with our residents.
I mean, obviously, at the moment we have it with the budget consultation where we send it out, we invite 180,000 residents to get involved in the budget consultation. I think the record stands at 54, and that's the same number of councillors we've got, so I don't know if they actually did it. But that's obviously fairly useless in terms of a tiny subsection of people, and a lot of the consultations, you get one parish that's got more than the rest of the borough put together. The survey we do, obviously, is a bit more scientific. It's a representative sample. It still has issues such as car parks, 55% are satisfied, that means 45% aren't. But I don't know whether that's because they couldn't get a space, or they didn't like the space, or they thought it cost too much, or it was too dark, or whatever. I've got no idea where the car was stolen. I don't know what the dissatisfaction is. So that's the listening bit that we're doing, of going round, making sure we meet parishes, making sure we meet as many residents as we can, knocking on doors. But also, of course, Paul and I cannot meet them all. But between us as 54 councillors, we speak to a hell of a lot of people. And that's why there's a bit more respect about what you bring as non-administration people, is to say, well, actually, Paul Miller is the expert on Chinham. He'll speak to more Chinham residents in the next 2 weeks than I'll likely to in the next 3 months. So actually what Councillor Miller tells me is really important, and I don't care about the colour of rosette. It's important about listening, and listening as widely as we can, not just to get the numbers, but get the nuance behind those numbers.
Anybody else? Councillor Jones? Yes.
I don't know whether it's relevant, but I'll raise it. How are you talking to the police? Because we have no police station in Basingstoke. Now, everywhere else south of Hampshire are getting new police stations, and people are quite worried. And people say there's a police station up the road. That's a holding cell. It's not a police station. And it's something that is needed for the town centre. It may come under the town centre regen, or it may not, but it's something that is needed. We need a police station in Basingstoke. Perhaps you should be talking to our lovely crime commissioner, because I'm raising it, because I'm on that panel in Hampshire. But
it just so happens that on Friday I attended an event down in Fareham, which was based around the whole future of our local policing. And isn't it always the case that you sometimes wind up reinventing the wheel? But the point being, the neighbourhood policing model, which served us very well 25 years ago, the police are looking at it again in the context of how they do policing locally. And they're doing it for all the right reasons. They're doing it for the reasons of wanting to re-engage with communities that have lost touch with them, have lost that connection with them. And I know very well that our local police force and our local chief inspector takes that very, very seriously, because we've spoken to him directly about it. We've had that engagement with them about what they want to do. And their relationship as local beat police officers with you as ward councillors will become quite critical, because you will become the eyes and the ears and the intelligence of your communities that will help them do their jobs, that will help them make those connections that they're seeking to make. And the other bit of it with the area cars, which were parked out the front of the station recently, they've gone out and bought the kit to do the job, to be fair to them, and they are looking at area cars. The problem we've got has always been not enough of them on the beat in the first place, and they still do struggle from that. Don't get away from all the years of austerity that we've seen. That has impacted on them, and they're open about that. They recognise that they can only do what they can do with the resources that they've got. But what we do as a local authority to supplement their work, to work with them with our CSPOs, is really strong. And I'm on the record here, despite what some people may have said in the Gazette, we as a local administration support our CSPOs. We always have done. We supported them when they were community wardens, and then they became CSPOs, and we support them today. We always have done. And their work in communities alongside the PCSOs, alongside the police, become part of your team. And that's your team, ward by ward, area by area. So yeah, I think the actual police are getting to a grip of how they want to do policing locally, and it will hopefully make a difference, and we want it to, because we need it to.
But it's a police, whether it's a shop front or something else, it needs to be something. The public are concerned, my residents are, they've raised it, and yeah, if something happens in the town, you know, where do you go? What do you do? There's nowhere. 999? No, it's not an emergency. 101? You know, 8 hours later, you might get an answer.
We're not ruling out a presence in the town, a sort of an accessible presence in the town. Obviously, it's not within our decision. That's obviously something for the police to ultimately do. It's their budget, their thing. What I would say is we want to get away from it. I know we have the pick, and obviously there is only 3 sort of proper police stations, Basingstoke, Southampton, Portsmouth, and that's it now, because that's the way their model works. But actually what you really want is an empty police station, because I want the car to be in Southam. I want to have a car in Buxton. I want the cars to be in Poplar. I don't want policemen sitting in a station. They need to be out and about. And of course, one of the things that's changed is the old days of maybe a dodgy CAB radio. They've got mobile phones. They've got tech in their cars. They can do everything in their cars. They can check loads of stuff. I'd rather see police out there patrolling and making us all feel safer, because actually most of us won't be a victim of crime, but the police presence really makes a difference and makes people safer in the street. So don't mind having a station, but a really small one with a very small canteen, because we're all out there, out and about, having tea and coffee in our community centres, going out and being in your local Tesco's Express and standing around there. That's what we want.
I'd just say that it's making people feel safe is the big issue, and by not having it, people do not feel safe in not just this town, in lots of towns, and it actually affects the courts as well. When you bind people over and have to report your work in there, and that you've got to look. Well, I'm not a magistrate. You're looking at, is there a police station they can report to, things like that. So it's not just a one-sided thing.
Can I just make a comment, just to reinforce what you said at your presentation? And it goes along to exactly what you've been saying here, Tony, is that we've got partners. We don't work these things on our own. And keeping that communication going, I fully endorse your CPSOs, because certainly in Chinham, let's go back to Chinham, we know who they are. They are active. They have coffee up in Costa. We see them, and it does. Their presence is felt, but they go to where the people are. On a normal day, they're not going to be walking down the residential streets, I'm afraid, but they go where the people congregate, and we see them, and they're part of the team. I think it could go a lot further, but I think that's the message. One of the messages to come back from us is endorse your approach to keep those communications going, not only with the police, but all the other third-party stakeholders, don't like the word, but who are out there that support the way the borough ticks.
We have a very strong relationship, I think, in health, in education, in our business community. We met with the Small Business Federation this afternoon. I mean, we're going out there, and I know Gavin says, you know, you can't meet everybody. We're damn well trying hard to. I mean, we are getting out and making sure that the message that this authority is there as a partner and as a broker and as somebody that seeks solutions. It's about the product and the delivery bit. And if we can achieve that, working with the police to get somewhere in the town centre in the future that would be like that, perfect. If we can get there with health, for example, you know, talking to the ICB about their future, about how we can have an engagement about the problems of primary care in our town. It's not our bag, as Gavin rightly says. There's only so much that we can do. But if we can get them around the table to have the conversation about the issues that people are facing, then we will do it, and we're doing it because of the strength of our partnership working. And one of the things that we want to do is to bring back the idea of a place board, where those senior decision makers sit round the table with us as the local authority to talk about Basingstoke's key issues so that we can resolve them and we can see a proper strategy that doesn't sit on the shelf and gather dust, but has got an action plan associated to solve the issues people face. It's that notion of the product at the end of it. So I know we're going to listen, and I know we're going to talk, and we're going to engage, and we're going to collaborate, but the other key focus of what we want to do is deliver. So we're not going to mess around. We want to get on and deliver this plan if you give us the power to do so at full council on the 19th of October.
Any more comments on the draft local plan from the committee? I'm going to draw a line under it then. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Appreciate it. It doesn't stop you if anything else comes up to feed any inputs into the leaders through the leader.
Thank you, Chair. Our door is always open.
Move on to agenda item number 7, the annual review of the housing allocation scheme. I think Councillor Laura James's tag needs to be moved down. There you go. Good evening, ladies. And before we go any further, Councillor James, do you want to introduce this, please?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Chair. And just in starting really the presentation tonight, I'd like to talk about the difficult time that we're actually living in and working in, and I make reference to that in the forward, in that the pipeline of affordable housing is reducing. We're seeing that. We're seeing the number of rented properties coming forward reducing. So it's a difficult time to be delivering housing, and so the supply is drying up, but demand is increasing. So if you look at the register, if you look at the report tonight, it talks about 4,700 people on the register. Well, in fact, today it's 5,000. So it's the trend is increasing on a regular basis. So that is the issue, you know, that we're working in. And also, I'd like to say, you know, in recognising that, saying a really big thank you to the staff of the housing department, because they're working within those very challenging times. There's always, within housing, there's always challenging times, but this is a particularly difficult time. It doesn't mean that we can't work through those issues, and they are, and they're finding really innovative ways of dealing with those issues. But this paper before you tonight is a technical report. It's a report that comes forward every year to you. The officers are here to answer those questions, but within the report, what there is some trends, and I think it's important that you look at those trends and you know, understand those and really make comment on those trends and see, you know, whether you agree with the housing allocation paper. You know, at the moment, and we advise that it stays, that it's people that are on the register are there on a basis of time served. So you you could do it different ways, but we feel that's the fairest way, and the residents feel that's the fairest way, and that's what we're presenting you tonight, is that we continue with that as a process. But in relation to some of those trends, I suppose in 2.2 of the report, I think that sums up really what this report is about. It's about the allocation scheme governs who can be nominated for and what is a primary statutory function of the council. So it's sort of saying, I think that really sums what this paper is about really for you. And in relation to some of the trends, if I could sort of pick out some of those trends for you, there's 1,235 people applicants, and 26% of those applicants on the housing register have not yet place a bid. So they've never placed a bid, and I think that's an interesting trend. That's not a new trend. It's a trend that's been there, and I just wanted to bring that to your attention. Really, 11% of those people on the register have never logged on to HomeBid, and that's a significant number. Which equates to 500 people of those people on the register. In the report, when it was written, was 4,700 have never actually turned on, or never, actually turned on to actually register, logged on to the HomeBid process. And we need to understand, why is that the case? Why are they doing that? And I think that the piece of work that we need to do going forward is to look at that. Of the 719 available for lettings during the year, 238 of those properties were houses and 372 were flats. And out of the 372 flats that were advertised, 59% of them were ground floor. Were not ground floor, and they didn't have access to a lift. So 59% of those didn't have that. So that's I think something that you need to consider and look at. 60% of households on the register are single, and as I said in the forward, I think the reality is that I suppose I had an assumption that they were young single people, but when you look at the breakdown of on page 91. Of the age profile of those single people, predominantly a lot of them are much older, and so I think it's as a housing department we need to look at different housing options and what and look at the needs of those single people on the register. 26 transfer applicants were refused to go back onto the register in relation to flatted accommodation. We need to understand with the work that we're doing why that was the case. We need to actually look at that. And 125 who are in band 1 are transfer applicants. 97% of those are under occupying. So we need to have a picture of those that are in that band and are not bidding and why they're not bidding. And so we need to have a clearer understanding of that. I mean, the good news is, and it's really good news, is that we've gone out for advert. We've actually offered posts work to 1.5 members of staff, full-time applicants to work on the register. That's in the paper in relation to page 79. And we're investing as a council significant money within that, and that's new, and there's a commitment to look at all of these issues or some of these trends and the piece of work, and particularly in about home visits and supporting people to go through the bidding process to access the home bid and support them through the lettings process. And those staff will be doing that. And they'll also be doing some of the detailed work around some of those trends to understand that, but to support people. And in relation to whether they are we'll be looking particularly at suitability for the register, and whether and what do we mean by suitability. But it's really what we want to hear from you tonight is for you to ask us some questions about that, to look at the trends, to look at what we're presenting to you, and do you support that way forward, really? Thank you.
Thank you. Kate, do you want to add anything before we open the floor up?
Only just to say very quickly what we prepared for you, because conscious that different members have different experience and knowledge about the housing allocation scheme. So to try to be helpful, we tried to summarise this in a technical appendix, and we may refer to some of that, but it basically sets out some of the key statutory issues and the main sort of features of the housing register system, which we may well refer to. So hopefully you've been able to read and assimilate and do the homework prior to coming here this evening. But of course we're here to give the technical answers, and they're often technical answers to any of the queries that you may have. Thank you.
Councillor Fenimore.
Yes, Chair, I've got a number of issues, but do you want me to deal with them individually, or do you want me to go all straight through?
How many have you got?
Well, not that many, but...
well, how many have you got?
About 3.
3. Right, start at the top with 3 issues. Let's start with 3 issues.
Well, firstly, I'm looking around the room, and there's only about 3 people that are older than me. But in the old days, we had a housing register.
I don't think that's the right thing to say either.
No, well, not. Yeah, go on then. In the old days, we had a housing register. And if you're on the housing register, as people above you got housed, you went up the scheme. And the bidding system, you know, it was introduced a long time ago, I expect, but does it really work for the residents to their best interests? Especially when we see there's 11% who have never logged on, 26% who have never even bid. So that's my first point. I do support the forward from the cabinet member. The point about flats, 2-bedroom flats. Residents may take the shortest route just to get housed and accept a 2-bedroom flat rather than wait longer period for a 2-bedroom house. But casework suggests some of those residents struggle to get back on the register as they are deemed adequately housed. So that's the second point. I do suggest the carrying out of home visits rather than desktop assessments, and that might work both ways. It might prove that someone doesn't qualify, as well as the opposite route. The last point really is that there's 39% of single-person households, as Laura said, are over 35. We need to assess and understand the individual needs of this group, and we are in dire supply of 4 to 5 bedroom houses, so we need to look at how we can build or provide additional housing.
Any comments to those points?
In terms of the question, does CBL work? I think that's a subjective question for which there's probably subjective answers. The comparison to how things were before bidding systems were in place is that people stated their preferred options for housing, would stay on the list, and then an officer would make a decision to deem that a suitable property had become available, and therefore that was your offer. CBL came in around 2010 on a sort of sea change of actually trying to put the power back to the applicants to bid. So they only have to bid on properties for which they're interested, and that's what we feel applicants are doing. However, we do have lots of safeguards and options in place to make bids for people who aren't able to, lots of assisted bidding. So I think it's, I mean, to go back probably to go back to a system whereby decisions were being made on behalf of people and decisions taken without input about whether or not those properties were suitable, arguably could be seen as a retrograde step, but it is a subjective issue.
Yeah, I was just going to add that in terms of does it work, people join the register, they've got to have a housing need, and then they're on in-date order. So I think it's much more transparent in that you're not going to have somebody else, you know, with the exception of Band 1, the exceptional cases, you're not going to have somebody joining the list after you and jumping over you. So people tend to think that this is a more transparent means that they will go up the register. Obviously, that's subject to, you know, what properties are advertised in a week, but it's more transparent. You know, as your date gets older, you're moving up the register.
Councillor James.
We're also, I think we're also looking at, as part of this process with these new staff, is are there things that we can do to improve the home bid system? You know, so when people are applying for housing, what else can we do to improve that? It's not our system, but what else can we do to influence that? And, you know, we're keen to do that. But I think it's also recognising that when people are waiting on the list, that we know that, you know, that it isn't easy for them, and that, you know, things are difficult. So, you know, they may have to wait a time. And so it isn't an easy time, you know, and I think that's important that we recognise that, and we have empathy for those people and the circumstances that they are living in at the time. And the reality is we have a shortfall of housing and we have demand, so we need to build more affordable housing to meet need. And that's the way that we're going to be able to improve things, so that, you know, that these people won't have to wait so long.
Yeah, I've got a question. Just first of all, be Councillor Basham, followed by Councillor Ganesh. My question is, when people join the register, you've given the figures, I'm not going to dig them out, of people who don't even bid, but surely they're given the information and the wherewithal. I'm struggling to understand why somebody who goes on a housing register who wants to go to move to be housed then doesn't even get onto the system to bid for one. That's something that a council can't control. When you give them the tools and give them the encouragement, but then you still have this statistical shortfall in here, that would be a concern, I think, for anybody who's representing their residents. What's causing that? Because we're doing, as an authority, we're doing all we can to help people in a vulnerable position, and yet they don't seem to be helping themselves.
That's not a new figure, so that's, you know, that's not something new. That's been there before, but we are concerned. So I am concerned about that, and we do need to understand why that is the case. There may be lots of reasons why those people are not bidding, but we don't know that until we do that piece of work, and that we need to identify that. So that new investment in the team will be able to look at that, and we do need to look at that. So that isn't something new. This is a figure that's been there before, but we are looking at that. So I think, you know, that's a really positive. And there may be lots of reasons why they're not bidding, you know, and we don't know why they're not bidding, but we need to find that out.
Councillor Basham.
Just to add the point that people may not be bidding because the properties that they feel would meet their needs don't become available. Whether or not people aren't turning onto the system, the council may take a decision that if you're not active on the housing register, you could come off. That's not in our policy at the moment, but I think that an option like that could be informed by the piece of work that we'll be doing. Some people, there is still a culture for some people of safeguard, put your name on the list. Get your name on the list, because you may always need to bank that time that you spent on the list.
I remember this conversation of about 15 years ago, when in the housing committee as it was then, and I think you mentioned it, those words, but before I've got that memory. Councillor Basham.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the paper. It's really interesting. I'm one of those people who is less informed about housing and on a learning curve. So apologies if I'm getting this wrong. I think when we have a classic supply and demand issue, Councillor Phillimore has mentioned, I think, something that I would back, which is, you know, we clearly need more supply of 4-bedroom, stroke 5-bedroom houses. I'm very interested in people who don't engage with the system. Very interested in people who've never even logged on, and I think those are good work streams to investigate, and I'm looking forward to the answers to that, or to the conclusions from that. I got interested in how you get on the list, and on page 95, it says applicants must fulfil the following criteria in order to qualify for inclusion on the register. So this is really looking at the demand and how we, I guess, gateway who gets onto the list. And I understand it's no longer what used to be called an open list. It's now more there are more criteria. So have a housing need. That's quite a broad phrase. I think that page 74 is a statutory definition set out by government. Is that correct? People who are homeless, occupying insanitary, overcrowded conditions, etc. And then we have some locally adopted definitions added on to that. People living in tied accommodation, people living in unaffordable private rented accommodation, and we'll come back to that question, unaffordable. Registered provider tenants who are under occupying and where accommodation is unsuitable or unsatisfactory. Again, two very subjective words, which I'm sure you have policies and guidance to back and support. And then, if we go back to page 95, let's assume that someone has a housing need and have met those tests. They have a local connection. Let's assume they meet that test. And then I do tax during the day, right? I do people's tax returns. So £50,000 of income, it raises a number of questions for me. One is, have a household income of less than £50,000 per annum. Is that set by central government, or is that our policy? And is it tied to the 20 to 40% tax bracket step, which is at 50,350, and used to be at 50,000? It leads me on to ask, when is that number reviewed? When was it last reviewed? Is it periodically retested when someone is on the list? Is it retested upon allocation of a property? When is that number raised or lowered? Can it be lowered? Because I ran a 50,000. I know everyone on the list is not on 50,000, and that is the top level, and that many people will be on less than that. But if that is a gross number and someone is earning £50,000 gross and is then taxed under PAYE, that's £3,169 a month of take home. Now, to rent a 2-bedroom flat in Basingstoke, I just looked on my phone earlier, it's about 1,200 quid it starts at. That's 38% of take home income. I'm not an expert in this, but when I read the papers, they talk about I think a good society is where housing costs are in the region of 30% of take-home pay, and a challenging society is when they're in the region of 50% of take-home pay. And so then I think about affordable housing at 80% of market rent, which would be 960, which would be 30% of that number. And I think about social housing, which has been raised several times, and I know affordable has been mentioned, but we're talking about building more social housing in this administration, and that's 40%, which would be £480, which would be 15% of that number. So I'm looking forward to much more explanation about how that number's assessed, managed, reviewed, and how, and perhaps part of the work stream, I'd really like to understand what the split on the register is of people who would qualify for social and people who would qualify for affordable, and what those gates are as well. Because I'll be honest with you, that's quite a lot of money. And I think the next one, on not having savings in excess of £30,000, I could repeat a lot of what I've said. But I think, I don't know, all the people I know, if you said you had £30,000 in savings, then you would be in the top 5% of the street where I live.
Shall I pick up the policy points? Because when this policy was overhauled, we didn't have an income limit bracket, so this was introduced for the first time. That £50,000 cuts across all household types, so that cuts across single people, couples, to families, and so it's important to remember, I guess, that a household type can be quite fluid. So you can go on as a single person, then become etc. 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 One thing that we wanted to ensure with the administration of the housing register is that it didn't become like a mini housing benefit function where there were so many administrative hurdles for people who have a housing need. To sort of come on and demonstrate that they couldn't afford to secure their own housing. So that cuts across all groups, and it's tied into limits as well that are applied for government low-cost home ownership initiatives like Help to Buy. The income levels for that are higher. It's reviewed every year in terms of linking up with our colleagues in the policy team to ensure that those levels shouldn't actually be raised or lower as well as lowered, because are we still certain that those can be affordable? With those income levels, you can't achieve something alternative in the private sector. So and we've had as many discussions at committee every year with some members arguing that the level should be raised. So I think it's one of those sort of Marmite sort of issues, really, whether it should be as low as possible to ensure that everyone coming onto the register has the lowest possible income or not. Neither does it take into account necessarily people's outgoings. So obviously an income of 50,000 for a family with even one child, really, they may well struggle. I think in terms of the practical application, to give certainly some reassurance that we're not housing affluent household types through the housing register, I'll pass you on to my colleague Sue, because she can sort of talk about how that practicality works out in terms of the allocation, which is what you asked.
Thank you. So as you say, when somebody makes an application to join the register, the check is that their income is below £50,000. Oh, that's better. It's their gross, and it's not necessarily just earned income. It may be other income that somebody receives. We do. Sorry. So it would include, things like universal credit, entitlement. What happens is we do an annual review on an application, and it's down to that individual to tell us if there's been a change in their income and they've exceeded that level. If somebody says no, if they continue to remain on the register, at the point in which they're successfully nominated to a housing association for a property, that housing association will also carry out an income check. And housing associations will also have a cap as to what somebody's income can be, because of their charitable status. If they exceed that, then they can't continue and offer a tenancy. So there are checks that are in place during the course of somebody's time on the register.
Could you also say about, in relation to the work that we've done?
Oh, around own home loan? Yeah. So when the scheme Own Home Loan came out, we were looking to direct it to single people, on couples on the housing register with incomes that would allow them to go out and purchase a property with the assistance of Own Home Loan. Well, we couldn't identify anybody with that sort of income on the list, and I think at the time, if I recall, there was only one maximum of 2 people that had sufficient income to go and get something, and it was nowhere near £50,000.
I'm trying to cover each subject as they come up. I'll come back to councillors and Councillor James, portfolio holder, wants to conclude a conclusion on this.
It was also to say that if someone is on that income, if they were on £50,000, they wouldn't be prepared, really, I don't think, to wait on the register for 4 years for a 1-bedroom flat. The reality is they would be going out to the market, because in relation to what we're doing on the register with single people, it's a significant wait. So, I don't think the reality is that they would be waiting.
Thank you, Chair. I completely agree that 50 should be proportional based on the size of the household. And if there's parents with 2 children there, it's a very different situation to a single person earning £49,000 or £50,000. I would personally like to see that taken into account in your work, and or with a view to whether that required a policy review. And I take your point about not wanting to replicate housing benefit, but I just think, you know, we've got almost 2,000 or 3,000 single people on the register, and it just struck me that it's very difficult to say, but you know, the families and or the elderly might be. We might be better to perhaps set the numbers so that they were more able to access the list more quickly. And no one's talked about the £30,000 savings point.
They're not competing against each other. So the numbers of single people on the register are competing against other single people rather than against families and against elderly people. So I think the issue is whether or not you would have set a lower limit for single people, and you'd probably, I mean, I'd be interested to hear ideas on what sort of income level and on what basis, you know, you could potentially lower that. It could be quite an arbitrary consideration. It could be one that differs, say in rural areas where the options are very different. So I think the policy intention was to keep it as simplistic as possible, albeit with some reference to you wouldn't have someone on, you know, 6 figures a year. So it's a balance. There's no right or wrong answer. It's a balance, but certainly it's an issue.
Coming forward.
No.
There's no one on the register in that bracket, you know.
I mean, I think you know, to take the point about research, we could do a spot check, say in a month, of all applications for single people. What was the average salary? We could do that to inform the policy and then bring that back.
I just think we need to think about reducing demand as well as boosting supply. There needs to be, there's two sides to the balance if we're going to address the problem effectively.
I quite agree, and I just had a word with Councillor Tustain. Again, changing task and finish groups now. She's chairing both of them. She'll take this particular point on board, and I think, Councillor Basham, if you're not on that task and finish group for housing, I think you might be dragged in for your expertise.
Me and my big mouth. Thank you.
That's what volunteering is all about. Councillor Ganesh.
Thank you, Chair.
One final point.
One final point, if it's of relevance to the task and finish group, that under homelessness legislation there is no ability to assess a person's income. So in fact, a millionaire could have a legitimate homeless application and an entitlement to be accepted. So we just need to balance how we can discharge homelessness responsibilities as well. So I think that's just for your benefit, Councillor Tustain, to include as part of that task and finish group. But obviously officers will be there to provide any information, etc., that you wanted to support that.
Yes, you won't be alone. Councillor Ganesh.
Thank you, Chair. I had two questions. The one is around the income bracket that Councillor Basham already asked and answered. Thank you. So the next question is around the housing mix. So how does this feed into our... We've clearly got a issue around sort of demand and supply. So how does this feed into our local plan or policies, this housing mix on particular or certain type of houses where we probably might be increasing or decreasing over the period, and how does that feed into on a regular basis in terms of local plan or policy making? Thank you.
It provides an extremely reliable and robust evidence base, and that's how we use it too. So we use it in negotiations and discussions with developers in terms of what type of housing, in what size and type may be required in certain locations. So and also having regard to the sustainability of affordable housing provision in new areas. So, for example, if you were just to sort of slavishly follow the criteria in your housing allocations register, which was, you know, the high proportions of single people, all you would ever get delivered is single persons flats, which may meet a need, but whether that delivers sustainable communities is highly questionable. So as I say, it's about, in different locations and in different areas, using it as an evidence base to provide solid, robust responses, and we are statutory consultees within the planning process to that.
Councillor Bound.
Thank you, Chair. This is particularly in relation to the rural areas, and the supply and demand in local areas is extremely small. Well, not the demand necessarily, but the supply must be very, very small. And young people, particularly in rural areas, have got no chance of staying in the rural areas because of the lack of supply. So I'm interested to know how we can, have you got ideas as to how we can overcome that and provide them with some sort of hope to be able to stay and sustain these local, these rural areas, because otherwise they will die. And I know you down here you've got have a local connection. In rural areas, that, as far as I'm concerned, has to be the priority. They've got to have a local connection. That might be difficult in terms of the bid process, but the local connection, I think, is imperative here.
All new affordable housing delivery is a priority within the housing and homelessness strategy, but that also recognises that rural housing provision is equally as important, and we do pursue every opportunity to develop new affordable housing in rural areas, and there are provisions within the local plan in terms of rural exception schemes. It's just that, you know, affordable housing delivery is difficult enough. Doing it in rural areas is even more difficult. Sue will talk about the sort of practical implications of the priorities, but it is worth noting as well that in some rural areas there may not be bids from people with a relevant local connection. I think that the report picks that up, that there were a number of properties for whom priority could have gone to local people had they wanted to bid, but in some scenarios they don't have local people bidding. But it can vary from one village and one parish and one location to another. It's very difficult, but the policy provision does allow for that priority to be given.
I'll just mention one thing, Mike, from planning. Neighbourhood plans. There's your rural vehicle to be able to provide the right kind of housing for the rural side of things. And that's what we've got 13, at least 13 now in Basingstoke and Dean. And there's your vehicle for getting your affordable housing into the rural areas. Right, Councillor Fillimore.
Sorry. Should I just say,
Sorry, Sue.
in terms of, so as Kate was saying, people that have got a local connection to a rural area, for all properties that are advertised in there, people with a local connection will get a priority over those that don't. Just interestingly, last year, 25% of all properties that were advertised were in the rural parishes, but only, I think it was 57% of those properties went to people with a local connection. So that's not to say that the people without a local connection got priority. They didn't. It was simply people didn't bid on them that did have a local connection.
Oh, sorry. In terms of affordable, it's affordable. Is it 80% of market, or 40% in terms of social? In rural areas, are those rents likely to be higher, purely because house prices are higher up in those areas?
So they're capped at local housing allowance levels. So anything that's an affordable rent, whether it be in a rural area or in the urban parts of town, the local housing allowance level, which is the cap, is the same.
Mine's a follow-up on the same issue, Sue, Kate. I've corresponded with you on this before, but when a new development comes on board, I get the intricacies of GDPR, but how do we, as ward councillors, know who from our local area is on the register so we can assist them to know to bid, because we don't want them to miss out on a local connection, and that is very important. And I think, don't take this personally, but would you trust you to get in touch with them, or do they have to just know that these new properties are coming on board and they better be on their toes and bid?
Yeah, I mean, I think generally people are expected to log on and bid, but I think where we've identified that people aren't, for example, new development in Overton, we've said we'll let you know when we're advertising those properties, and then you can disseminate to people, but we won't be able to share the details of who is on the list. But we can share with you that properties are going to come up on choice-based lettings, and you can get the words out in the communities. So I was going to say that there are occasions, like for example, that development whereby we can message out to people that properties are becoming available, but means they need to check.
Councillor Jones.
You already know, I told you. Local connections. I haven't got a problem with the rural bit, but I've got a problem with the town. I'm representing Southam. There's families in there looking for housing, got schools, everything else, and we're losing our community because obviously they go somewhere else. Surely we should be looking at trying to keep people where they want to be. So Southam, Oakridge, wherever. You know, it's a one-sided thing. You know, we talk about communities in villages, but we don't talk about communities in towns, and they are communities. We every other aspect of the town area, we talk about communities, but when it comes to housing, we treat it differently, and that I think we should be looking at. Whether if people want to, for instance, Southam, I represent, want to live there, they might have to wait longer because they don't come up. We're not building around there, but they may be willing to. They may say, no, I can't wait that long, I'll go somewhere else. But it should be there as an option, I believe, you know, in areas where there's family and everything else. Because all you're doing is getting new people in. Yes, there's nothing wrong with new people, but your community is already there and you're losing it.
It goes back to, I suppose, the council plan tonight and talking about regeneration. So that's going to be a key, isn't it, in relation to future supply is going to be important. But again, it's about the register. And if people want to wait until something comes available in Southam, they can do that. But the difficulty is people who are in housing need or in crisis or whatever are unlikely to wait. So what we've got to do is make sure that we're building more accommodation, you know, in those areas. And that is about, hopefully we'll see that in relation to the regeneration of Southam and Buckskin, more accommodation will become available to people to move into. I think Kate wants sorry.
Really very quickly, we have examples of local lettings policies. Yeah. So we have the rural allocations that have their own lettings policy anyway by virtue of the priority. We've done Chinham House in Popley, and we did one at Winklebury. To be fair, they haven't been particularly successful in terms of actually people having the same identified connection with a particular area within a town. They may feel that some people may feel an affiliation, but where we've advertised properties and said we will give priority in this particular scheme to people with that local connection, they haven't necessarily come forward. So I think it's an absolutely valid point. Whether it works in practice and whether the people within all town areas have an affiliation with a particular area and one and not others, I think I'm not quite sure that exists. But the bidding process is there to enable people to only bid on properties for which they want to be considered. So we don't actually place anyone from here to here. People do make that choice, and I know choice is again a sort of weighted term, but that is what the choice-based lettings process does allow for.
Could I just come back on that? That's fine, but what we're actually doing is we're running a two-tier system. Now, if I lived in Overton, lived there all my life, I will get 2 shots at getting a house, won't I? Because I can actually go on the register and go and live in Popley, Southam, wherever, but I'll get priority if I'm willing to wait for Overton or one of the villages. All I'm saying is we should look at it in the light of if there's a reason for people to be living in that area and they wish to live in that area, surely we should give them the same priorities as everybody else. Now, whether it's workable, that's your job, I'm afraid to say. But we shouldn't be, really, sometimes it really annoys me when we talk about communities. And they're not just in the rural areas, they're in the town, and we should be looking at that.
Maybe opportunities in discrete areas, so with new development, particularly falling out of regeneration proposals where you've got people that may have been displaced by regeneration, etc., etc. There is scope to do that, and that's what we've done with individual local letting schemes. Whether or not it would fly across an entire allocation policy for all the lettings, I'm not so sure. I think that would add so many complications. It would contaminate the simplicity that we try to get in a sort of the system that we've got. But there's no reason why that couldn't be explored, in the task and finish group as to what the practical application of that might be. I just think we should be careful what we wish for sometimes.
Asking for us to actually look at it and see if there is an option.
Right. Councillor Bose.
Thank you, Chair. Oops. As you're sort of following on from that, really, the people in crisis accepting the first place available, which may not be a fit, the wrong area, or perhaps they've got children and they take somewhere on an upper floor instead of a ground floor. Is there any way that we can allow them to rebid instead of being trapped in an unsuitable home? Because, I mean, it would still then free up the place that they've accepted, which might be absolutely perfect for somebody else. But it looks like we're basically, say, trapping people in places that isn't a great fit for them because they were in crisis at the time rather than being able to wait. I don't know if that's possible or whether it would just be absolutely horrendous to try and administer that.
It all boils down to the definition of suitability, and so one person's housing need might be another person's housing dissatisfaction, and the two are very different things. One thing that we can be guided by is the legislation, and the legislation requires that we have to give preference to people with clearly set out reasonable preference, it's called, but housing need. And so any scheme that sort of enabled people with reasonable priority to constantly be sort of overlooked by people without a reasonable priority could be challenged. But certainly if people's circumstances change, or that can be reviewed, and certainly the portfolio holder has asked that we look at what criteria we're using when we assess suitability, and whether or not the provisions that we've got in the policy at the moment are sufficiently sensitive to the issues facing some households in flats.
So if somebody moves into a flat and at a later date, or even if it wasn't particularly suitable, but they moved in there because of their circumstances at that time, and then they want to move out, hopefully these new members of staff will be able to assess need and suitability for them to then be able to move on, and that's what this is about. And that will be, it won't necessarily be a desktop exercise that they were about to do home visits now to look at why they need to move and whether they meet the criteria. And I echo your concerns. I do echo those, and and I'm really keen that we look at that as a piece of work. And I've always said that I'm really concerned about people that are trapped in flats and what we can do to support them to move.
Brilliant. Sorry. I was just going to say thank you.
Just to be very clear that it's a really tough call to make, because the more people that you allow onto the register in a date-ordered system, the more people will have to be waiting for longer and longer and longer, and that's a really difficult balance, particularly when people are waiting in some really acute levels of need. Not enough to be in band 1, but if more people are hanging around on the register with longer waiting times, in a situation where we have sort of dwindling supply at the moment, that's basically where we're at, and then that compounds our ability to prevent homelessness, because the thing about a date ordered system is that we can work really well with people to say, to avoid becoming homeless, to avoid going into bed and breakfast. These are the sorts of options that you could do if you wanted to bid on the housing register, and those posts will be instrumental in that as well. So it's a really tough call.
Thank you. Yeah, a horrible job. I don't envy you.
Councillor Basham.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a very quick point about band ones, and obviously they have a priority, and many or most of them are in under-occupied, or with 2 bedrooms or more under-occupied accommodation. So obviously there's a benefit to repurposing those to bigger families. Very low number of people bidding and moving out. I mean, I thought about this, and if you move them out of band 1, if they don't bid enough, you just move them into band 2, and it just takes longer for them to move. So it's sort of self-defeating. But I'd be very interested from the work stream in what the ideas are around boosting supply, around desirable accommodation for these people to move into. I know it's a problem in our ward, and so that's a part of the work stream I would like to see come forward.
So obviously I mean, we're not into forcing those people into accommodation they don't want, and I think we need to remember the accommodation is their home, and they could have been in that home for a long time. So it is a home, and we need to do a piece of work to identify what is it that group of people want to live in. There are people that have moved from that band into accommodation, so we need to look at that. It was a very small number, but we need to understand that in some more detail, and what we can do to support them to move. And so it's about what is it that we're building. So that moves on to the paper that we're taking to EPH in relation to what we're, building our own accommodation and what we can do to influence some of this. So it's what type of accommodation are we building?
Right, let's come to a natural conclusion. I'm just going to run through the recommendations for this particular paper in the report. Is to note the report. I won't read through the whole thing, but there's 3 items. We will be looking at task and finish groups in a minute. When we've concluded this, we've got 2 to address in the work programme. And views of the Scrutiny Committee are sought to inform this review. I think we've had plenty of comment tonight. And I'm quite sure officers and the portfolio holder have taken those on board. And I think it's educated a few members of the committee as well. And we've talked about the additional resourcing. So I'll bring this to a conclusion. If you'd like to sum up, portfolio holder. That's what you do.
Thank you. I'd just like to say thank you to the committee, and I welcome your comments. And I also look forward to working with the Task and Finish group, and I'm very happy to support you and work through that work that you're going to be doing. And I think, the next stage of this is obviously we will bring this back, I guess, next year. But it's also what we need to do is we need to come back to you with some of the findings of the work that we do in relation to, going forward. And so once we've done those pieces of work, we will bring them back to you as asked, in relation to the council plan. I think it's good that we are able to give answers to some of the questions that have been raised here tonight. But also, I think the next stage of this piece of work really is the development of housing and what we're going to do as a council in our own right. And I think it's really important that we develop affordable housing with a focus on social rented and what that product looks like in relation to what tenure, what size is important. And I think that that's what a priority needs to be if we want to address some of the concerns that you've raised tonight, really.
Thank you very much, and I'll draw that to a conclusion. Thank you very much. We now move on to the agenda item number 8, which is the work programme.
Yeah, it's getting chilly now, so.
Well, it's out of my hands. The director was dealing with this earlier on. Right. As far as the committee is concerned, I think we've mentioned on two aspects of the agenda tonight, task and finish groups. And Councillor Tustain, well, she's taking on both as chair. And she and I have been discussing it. I've passed on a couple of aspects of my experience of running the S106 task and finish group. But as far as the committee is concerned, I think we need to have a look, or they will need to develop terms of reference, I believe, terms of reference of housing has been achieved. I think I'm not missing a point here that Councillor Tustain's got a fairly good idea now of what is going to be covered under that particular task and finish group. But now we've got the task and finish group for transport. Now, at the back end of the transport paper, it identified a number of members, or do we need to get members for that? Right. Well, you've heard the transport briefing, the update we had tonight, and unfortunately we had two members of the committee not here. However, do we have any volunteers sitting in the room that would volunteer to go onto the transport task and finish group? Well, we can do that, yes. Okay. Okay, I think Councillor Sustain's just said, I think we'll issue an invitation out to the group leaders. Now, how many? Well, we'll see how many volunteers come forward. The whole issue is cross-party. There's nothing. This is the same as how we address everything in the scrutiny committee. But we need to get the numbers, the names fairly soon, because the task and finish group, we need to look forward to when it's going to finish, and that way, the leader of the task and finish group can then program how the work that needs to be done is achieved. Because if you do it that way around, otherwise it becomes an open-ended talking shop. If you've got objectives which you identify in the terms of reference, it's easy then to say, right, second quarter 24 or whatever it comes out to, and then it comes back to the scrutiny committee for us to review, and then onward probably up to the cabinet. So that's the way forward on the task and finish groups. If we can go through the various work, and if I can turn to you, Sue, if you've got any input into the work programme that we have in item number 8, or anybody's got any input to these, please sing out. On tonight's, we've covered everything on the work programme this evening. Housing policy, transport and draft council plan. For the 21st of November, the draft budget proposals, that will probably take most of the evening. Would you agree? But I think traditionally on the scrutiny committee, that's one agenda item meeting on the 21st of November. 23rd January, I think that should read 2024. It says 2023 on the paper. We got the performance indicators, annual infrastructure funding statement, and the monitoring report for planning. And again, that seems to be quite a full agenda item. I would suggest that, bearing in mind we're now sitting in September, maybe an update from the task and finish groups, just to see that they're on the way. I mean, that's just a briefing update from yourself, Councillor Tustain. 19th of March, again, fairly routine review of housing associations. Interesting subject. Review the waste service provision, Serco. Again, that seems to be an annual event. And Q3 key performance indicators. That's probably as far ahead as we can see realistically, unless there are any members of the committee that feel that there's anything else that ought to go in there. I'll probably ask the question at each committee meeting anyway. To be confirmed, how the council works with local businesses and White Festival Place managers. There's an awful lot of businesses apart from Festival Place. I found that a very curious item that to be confirmed. Festival Place has also changed hands at the top level. I'm not quite sure where that one came from. Did it?
I think it came out of the chair's overview and scrutiny meeting, where they were suggesting a list of topics, and I think that's one that we haven't received a formal form for, so that's just on there as to be confirmed.
Because that one liner I put a big question mark against, because that's not realistic. It's up to the hyphen I go along with, but not when you just invite Festival Place, because it's a much bigger subject than that. That would, yeah, a local business strategy and policy has been suggested. That'd be a much better way of addressing it. But I have a regular meeting in the local business community, and
it might be worth suggesting that that's reviewed again at the next quarterly chairs meeting in terms of subject items, just to understand what the driver was behind it and agree which committee it should go to.
Yep. Right. Do you have anything else? I'm declaring the committee as closed. Thank you very much, everybody. It's 9:25.